I'm traveling with my ex-lover. We'll share a bed in a private room. But trust me, nothing will happen. My wife texted me while she was with him. Then came back pregnant and demanded I take responsibility. But the court's ruling made her collapse. Look, I've been married to Clara for 5 years, which in marriage years is like 137, and in that time I've learned to read her faces. She's got the "I bought another pair of shoes" face, the "your mother called and I pretended we weren't home" face, and the absolute classic "I crashed your car, but it's technically not my fault" face. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing in my extensive catalog of Clara's facial expressions could have prepared me for the face she walked in with that Tuesday evening. She strolled into our living room with this weird mix of confidence and guilt, like she'd just been appointed as the CEO of Bad Decisions Incorporated and was about to announce their new product line. I was sitting on our couch, the one we'd fought about buying because she wanted the beige one that matches everything, and I wanted the gray one that doesn't show stains. And I was minding my own business, scrolling through my phone and pretending to care about whatever drama was unfolding in my group chat. She stood there for a moment, and I could feel her presence like when you know someone's watching you eat and you suddenly forget how to chew normally. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. The face. This wasn't in my catalog. This was new, uncharted territory, and my internal alarm system started blaring like a fire drill at 3 in the morning. "Hey, babe," she said, with that tone that's way too casual, the kind of casual that's working overtime to sound casual, which immediately makes it the least casual thing in the universe. "I need to talk to you about something." Now, let me tell you something about the phrase, "I need to talk to you about something." In the history of relationships, this phrase has never, ever been followed by good news. Nobody ever says, "I need to talk to you about something," before announcing they've won the lottery or found $20 in their old jeans. No, this phrase is exclusively reserved for announcements that range from mildly inconvenient to absolutely catastrophic. I put my phone down slowly, the way you'd put down a weapon when surrendering to enemy forces, and gave her my full attention. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though internally I was already running through worst-case scenarios. Did she wreck the car? Is her mother moving in? Did she join a pyramid scheme? Is she pregnant? Did she sell my PlayStation? The possibilities were endless and equally terrifying. Clara took a deep breath, and I swear to God, time slowed down. She clasped her hands together like she was about to deliver a presidential address, and then she just said it, straight out. No warning, no build-up, no "you might want to sit down for this." She just dropped it like a bomb at a peace conference. "I'm going on a trip with Jason," she said, and I blinked. Jason. Jason. The name echoed in my head like someone had just yelled it into the Grand Canyon. Jason, as in her ex-boyfriend Jason. Jason, the guy she dated for 3 years before we met. Jason, who she swore was completely in the past and just a friend now, and really mature about the whole thing. Before I could even process that nuclear warhead of information, she continued, and somehow made it worse. "We're traveling together for a work thing, and we'll have to share a room." She paused, and I could see her calculating her next words like a chess player trying to avoid checkmate. "We'll be sharing a bed, actually, because it's a small place, and that's all they have available." I felt my brain short-circuit. I literally felt the exact moment my neurons just gave up and went on strike. I was holding my coffee mug. The one that says "World's Okayest Husband," which Clara bought me as a joke, but now felt like a prophecy, and I nearly dropped it. Nearly choked on the sip I'd just taken. Coffee went down the wrong pipe, and I started coughing like I'd just inhaled a cloud of pepper spray. Clara rushed over and patted my back, which felt absurd considering she'd just told me she was planning to play house with her ex-boyfriend. But sure, let's worry about my respiratory system. When I finally stopped coughing and could breathe again, I looked at her with what I can only imagine was the expression of a man who'd just been told the sky was now purple, and we all had to pretend that was normal. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to croak out. She gave me this look, this practiced, rehearsed look that I recognized from every argument we'd ever had where she knew she was in the wrong, but was going to power through anyway. "It's just for work," she said, like that explained anything. "It's a conference, and Jason's company is partnering with mine, and we need to present together. It's only 3 days. Only 3 days. Only." As if the duration was the problem here, and not the fundamental concept of my wife sleeping in the same bed as her ex-boyfriend. And before you freak out, she continued, holding up her hand like a traffic cop, I want you to trust me. Nothing is going to happen. We're both adults. We're both professionals. And honestly, Jason's really not even my type anymore. I stared at her. Just stared. Because what do you even say to that? How do you respond when someone essentially asks you to trust them while simultaneously describing a scenario that's specifically designed to destroy trust? It's like asking someone to trust you while juggling chainsaws blindfolded. Sure, maybe you're skilled, maybe you're confident, but the setup itself is inherently problematic. Trust you, I repeated slowly, tasting the words like they were spoiled milk. You want me to trust you while you share a bed with Jason. Jason, who you dated for 3 years. Jason, who according to your own stories, you were crazy about and almost married. That Jason. She nodded enthusiastically, like I was finally getting it, which showed exactly how much she wasn't getting it. Yes, exactly. See, you remember all that, which is exactly why you know it's completely over between us. We're different people now. He's changed. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a funny laugh, but one of those laughs that escapes when your brain can't process the absurdity anymore and just defaults to hysterical amusement. Changed, I said, shaking my head. He's changed. Into what exactly? A decent human being? Someone who understands boundaries? A monk? Clara's face tightened, and I could see her patience starting to fray, which was rich considering she was the one asking me to be okay with this insanity. You're being ridiculous, she said, crossing her arms. This is exactly why I hesitated to tell you. I knew you'd react like this. And there it was. The classic redirect. Somehow, me having a completely reasonable reaction to an unreasonable situation was now the problem. My wife was about to sleep in the same bed as her ex-boyfriend, but sure, I was the one being difficult. Clara, I said, setting my coffee mug down on the table with more force than necessary. If this is your idea of trust, I genuinely cannot wait to see your definition of betrayal. Does that involve actual infidelity? Or is that also just a work thing I should be cool about? She gave me that look then. That innocent, wide-eyed look that women have perfected over millennia. The one that's supposed to make you feel like you're the crazy one for questioning their obviously questionable decisions. It's the look that says, I'm just a simple girl making simple choices. Why are you complicating things? But I'd been married long enough to know that look was usually deployed right before they did something absolutely evil in the name of personal growth or finding themselves or some other therapy speak that basically meant, I'm about to do whatever I want and you're supposed to support it. Look, she said, her voice taking on that condescending patience that made my blood pressure spike. I came to you because I respect you and our marriage. I didn't have to tell you about the sleeping arrangements, but I did because I believe in transparency. Transparency. She wanted credit for transparency while describing a situation that was basically a paint-by-numbers guide to infidelity. Wow, I said, clapping slowly. Thank you so much for your transparency. Really, what an incredible gift. You could have just betrayed me quietly, but instead you're giving me a front-row seat to the disaster. How thoughtful. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes at me, like I was being dramatic. Nothing is going to happen, she insisted. We'll probably barely even talk. We'll be so exhausted from the conference that we'll just pass out. It's literally just a sleeping arrangement, not a romantic getaway. I leaned back on the couch and looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something. She actually believed what she was saying. Or at least, she'd convinced herself she believed it. She'd rationalized this whole thing in her head until it made sense to her, until she was the reasonable one and I was the paranoid, insecure husband who didn't trust his wife. The cognitive dissonance was actually impressive in its completeness. You know what? I said finally, standing up. Sure, go ahead. Take your little trip with Jason. Share your little bed. Have your little work conference. Just do me one favor. She looked hopeful, like maybe I was coming around, like maybe reason was prevailing. What? She asked. Send me postcards, I said. One from each day? Make them nice and detailed. Greetings from the dumbest idea of the year. Wish you were here at the destruction of our marriage. Really capture the moment. Her face fell, and the hope drained out of her eyes like water from a burst pipe. You're being impossible, she said quietly. No, I corrected her. I'm being a husband who's watching his wife plan a sleepover with her ex and being told that's normal. There's a difference. She stood there for another moment, and I could see the wheels turning, see her trying to figure out if she should keep arguing or cut her losses. She chose the latter. Fine, she said, her voice cold now, all the fake sweetness gone. I tried to include you. I tried to be honest, and this is what I get. I'm going on this trip whether you like it or not. It's important for my career, and I'm not going to let your insecurity ruin this opportunity for me. And with that, she turned and walked toward our bedroom, leaving me standing there in the living room, still holding my world's okayest husband mug, wondering at what point exactly I'd fallen into an alternate universe where this was supposed to be acceptable. I sat back down on the couch, the beige one that matches everything apparently except my wife's decision-making skills, and stared at the wall. Trust me, she'd said. Trust me. Those two words echoed in my head like a bad song you can't stop humming. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't just about a trip. This was about everything. This was the moment where I either stood up for basic sanity and self-respect, or I became the kind of guy who waves goodbye as his wife shares a bed with her ex and calls it professional development. I picked up my phone and texted my buddy Frank. Bro, you free? I need a drink and possibly a lawyer. He texted back immediately, always. What happened? I typed out my response. My wife just asked me to trust her while she sleeps with her ex. For work, apparently. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm on my way. Order the strong stuff. I smiled grimly and set my phone down. Yeah, I thought. This is definitely a strong stuff kind of situation. Frank showed up 45 minutes later with a bottle of whiskey that looked expensive enough to require a mortgage, and we sat in my kitchen like 2 war veterans discussing battlefield strategies. He listened to the whole story, occasionally shaking his head or muttering "no way" under his breath, and when I finished, he just looked at me and said, Bro, that's not a wife. That's a walking disaster documentary. I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that hurt coming out, the kind that's 90% pain and 10% disbelief. We killed about half that bottle while I ranted about trust and boundaries and basic human decency, and by the time Frank left around midnight, I was buzzed enough to think I could actually have a rational conversation with Clara about this whole mess. Spoiler alert, I could not. I walked into our bedroom where she was already in bed, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just nuked our marriage earlier that evening. She looked up when I came in, and I could see her calculating whether to engage or pretend to be asleep. She chose engagement, which in retrospect was probably the worst option for both of us. Are you done sulking? She asked, not even looking up from her phone. Sulking. She called my completely justified anger sulking, like I was a toddler upset about bedtime instead of a grown man watching his wife plan an overnight trip with her ex. I'm not sulking, I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the whiskey and rage cocktail flowing through my system. I'm trying to understand how we got to a place where you think this is okay. She sighed, that long-suffering sigh that women do when they think you're being deliberately obtuse, and finally put her phone down. We're having this conversation again? She asked. Yes, Clara, we're having this conversation again, because the first one ended with you telling me you're doing it anyway, and me wondering if I accidentally married someone with the judgment skills of a lemming. She sat up straighter, and I could see her switching from dismissive mode to combat mode. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed, and I knew we were about to have the kind of argument that neighbors hear through walls and talk about at their next barbecue. You know what your problem is? She started, and I already knew this was going to be good because nothing productive ever follows that phrase. You're controlling. You can't handle the fact that I have a life outside of this marriage, that I have professional relationships and opportunities that don't revolve around you. Controlling. She really went there. She really pulled out the controlling card because I didn't want her sharing a bed with her ex-boyfriend. Controlling? I repeated, feeling my blood pressure spike to levels that probably required medical intervention. I'm not controlling, Clara. I'm allergic to stupidity, and you're about to go into anaphylactic shock from the dose you're planning to take. She threw the covers off and stood up, and now we were both standing on opposite sides of the bed like gunslingers in some twisted western where the shootout was about marriage boundaries instead of cattle rustling. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said, her voice rising. You can't just trust me to make my own decisions. You have to insult me and make me feel bad for having a career and maintaining professional relationships. Professional relationships. That's what she was calling this. A professional relationship with the guy she used to call the love of my life before I came along and apparently demoted Jason to colleague I'll share a bed with. Professional relationships don't typically involve shared beds. I shot back. That's not networking. That's Netflix and chill with a PowerPoint presentation. She pointed her finger at me, actually pointed like she was scolding a dog who'd peed on the carpet. Jason has changed, she insisted, her voice taking on this defensive edge that told me she'd been telling herself this lie so many times she almost believed it. He's not the same person he was when we dated. He's mature now, he's focused on his career. He's basically a completely different person. I couldn't help it. I started laughing again, that same hysterical laugh from earlier. Changed into what? I asked. Into a decent human being? Because last I checked, decent human beings don't agree to share beds with their ex-girlfriends who are currently married. That's not character growth. That's just being an opportunistic jackass with better timing. Clara's face turned red. That specific shade of red that happens when someone knows you're right, but is way too committed to their position to admit it. You don't even know him, she said. You've met him maybe twice, and you've decided he's some kind of villain. He's actually a really good guy. A really good guy. Her ex-boyfriend, who was perfectly fine with sleeping in the same bed as a married woman, was a really good guy. I wondered what her definition of a bad guy was. Probably someone who murdered puppies while committing tax fraud. You're right, I don't know him well, I admitted. But I know enough to know that good guys don't put married women in compromising positions. Good guys say, hey, maybe we should get separate rooms. Good guys respect boundaries even if the person they're dealing with apparently doesn't. She crossed her arms, going full defensive now. It's a work trip, she said, enunciating each word like I was hard of hearing or particularly stupid. A work trip. We have to present together. We'll be in meetings and conferences all day. The sleeping arrangement is just logistical. Logistical. She was trying to make adultery sound like project management. Oh, I see, I said, nodding like I was finally understanding. It's logistical. Because when you share a bed with your ex, it's obviously for business purposes. Strictly PowerPoint presentations and pillow talk about quarterly earnings. Maybe you can spoon while discussing market trends. Her eyes flashed dangerously. Nothing is going to happen, she said through gritted teeth. Why can't you get that through your thick skull? I don't have feelings for Jason anymore. I married you. I chose you. This trip is about my career, not about him. I walked around the bed until I was standing right in front of her, close enough to see the stubborn set of her jaw, the defensiveness in her eyes. Clara, I said quietly, trying one more time to inject some sanity into this conversation. If you get on that plane, if you go on this trip, you're stepping out of this marriage. I'm not okay with this. I will never be okay with this. And if you choose to do it anyway, you're choosing him over us. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing across her face. Part of her knew I was right. Part of her understood that what she was planning was insane. But the other part, the part that was stubborn and proud and convinced she was being reasonable, that part was winning. You're being insecure, she finally said, and those 3 words felt like a slap. This has nothing to do with security or insecurity, I said, my voice harder now. This has to do with respect. This has to do with basic marriage rules that apparently we never discussed because I assumed they were obvious. Things like don't sleep with your ex seemed like it was covered under the general umbrella of matrimony. She shook her head, and I could see tears forming in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from frustration or actual sadness or just tactical weapons deployed to make me feel like the bad guy. I can't believe you're making me choose between my career and my marriage, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm not making you choose, I corrected her. Your career isn't asking you to share a bed with Jason. That's a choice you're making. You could get separate rooms. You could not go. You could tell your company that the sleeping arrangements are inappropriate. You have options here, and you're choosing the one that involves sleeping with your ex. She wiped her eyes angrily, like the tears themselves had betrayed her. You know what? Fine. I'll go. I'll go because this opportunity is important to me, and I refuse to let your jealousy and insecurity hold me back from advancing my career. And when I come back and nothing has happened, maybe you'll finally trust me. I stood there, watching her, and I realized something. This wasn't about trust at all. She'd framed it that way, made it about my trust issues and my controlling nature and my insecurity, but that was all smoke and mirrors. This was about her wanting to do something she knew was wrong, and needing me to give her permission so she could do it guilt-free. No, I said simply. She blinked. What? No, I repeated. I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to come back and tell me I was wrong to worry. I'm not going to be the understanding husband who waves goodbye while you go play house with your ex and then welcomes you back with open arms. If you get on that plane, don't bother coming back. Her mouth fell open. You're giving me an ultimatum? She asked, her voice rising to a pitch that probably alarmed the neighbors. You're seriously going to end our marriage over a business trip? I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw someone I didn't quite recognize anymore. Someone who could rationalize anything if it meant getting what she wanted. Someone who could turn her husband's reasonable boundaries into character flaws. I'm not ending our marriage, I said quietly. You are. I'm just refusing to pretend that what you're doing is okay. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and I could see her doing the mental calculation. Was I bluffing? Would I really follow through? Could she risk it? Finally, she grabbed her pillow and a blanket. Fine, she spat out. I'll sleep on the couch. And tomorrow, I'm getting on that plane, and when I come back, we're going to have a serious discussion about your trust issues and whether this marriage can survive your controlling behavior. She stormed out of the bedroom, and I heard her dramatically throwing herself onto the couch in the living room, making sure I could hear every movement, every adjustment of the pillow, every sigh of martyrdom. I sat down on the edge of the bed and put my head in my hands. The whiskey buzz had worn off, replaced by a headache that felt like someone was using my skull as a drum set. I looked at my phone and saw a text from Frank. How'd it go? I typed back. She called me controlling and insecure. She's still going. 3 dots appeared. Damn, bro. You okay? I stared at that question for a long time. Was I okay? My wife was about to fly across the country to share a bed with her ex-boyfriend, and I was supposed to be okay with it because it was just logistics. No, I finally typed back. But I will be. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to figure out when exactly my marriage had turned into a reality show I didn't audition for. Somewhere in the living room, Clara was probably texting Jason about what a terrible, controlling husband she had. And tomorrow, she'd get on that plane, and I'd have to decide if I really meant what I said about her not coming back. But tonight, in this moment, all I could think was that when someone tells you to trust them right before doing something obviously untrustworthy, what they're really saying is, I'm about to betray you, and I need you to pretend it's fine. And I was done pretending. She left the next morning while I was pretending to be asleep. I heard her moving around the apartment, the sound of her suitcase wheels on our hardwood floor, the jingle of her keys, the soft click of the front door closing. I lay there in bed, eyes closed, listening to the silence that followed, and I wondered if this was what the end of a marriage sounded like. Not a bang, but a suitcase rolling out the door at 6 in the morning. I got up an hour later, made coffee, and went to work like it was a normal day, even though everything felt like I was walking through one of those dreams where you're pretty sure nothing is real, but you can't quite wake up. My coworkers asked how I was doing, and I said fine, with the kind of smile that probably looked more like a grimace, and they seemed satisfied enough not to dig deeper, which was good because I wasn't sure I could explain that my wife was currently on a plane heading toward what would either prove me wrong or destroy our marriage. Frank called me during lunch. She really went? He asked, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice even though I'd already told him she would. Yep, I said, staring at my sandwich like it had personally offended me. She really went. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Listen, man, I know this sucks, but maybe nothing will happen. Maybe she's telling the truth. I appreciated the attempt at optimism, really I did. But it felt like someone telling you that maybe the Titanic would miss the iceberg this time around. Yeah, I said, not believing it for a second. Maybe. The first day was brutal. I kept checking my phone like a teenager waiting for a text from his crush, except instead of hoping for a message, I was dreading it. What would she say? Would she text at all? Would she send me a photo of her and Jason having dinner with a caption like, see? Just professional. The whole thing made me feel pathetic, like I was the suspicious husband in some bad rom-com, and I hated it. I hated that she'd put me in this position. I hated that I cared. I hated that I couldn't just stop thinking about what was happening in whatever hotel room they were sharing. The text came on the second day, right in the middle of a meeting with my boss about quarterly projections. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at it reflexively, and there it was. A message from Clara. My heart did this weird thing where it simultaneously sank and jumped, like it couldn't decide which emotional response was more appropriate. I excused myself from the meeting, told my boss I had an urgent call, and basically sprinted to the bathroom like my life depended on it. I locked myself in a stall, sat down on the toilet lid fully clothed, and opened the message with hands that were shaking slightly, which annoyed me because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of affecting me this much. The text read, "Don't worry, babe, nothing happened. Jason snores like a tractor. LOL." I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, reading it over and over like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Don't worry, nothing happened. Jason snores like a tractor. And then, the real kicker, LOL. She'd actually typed LOL, like this was some funny anecdote she was sharing, like we were talking about her weird Uber driver or a funny thing that happened at Starbucks. She'd reduced the nuclear explosion of our marriage to LOL. But wait, there was more. Below the text was a photo, and when I clicked on it, I felt something inside me either die or reach a new level of consciousness where I could understand the true depths of human audacity. It was a selfie of her and Jason, both of them smiling at the camera, both of them wearing matching white bathrobes. His arm was around her shoulders. They looked like they were starring in a honeymoon package advertisement. The only thing missing was a bottle of champagne and rose petals on the bed. I sat there on that toilet in my office bathroom, staring at this photo, and I tried to figure out what dimension of reality I'd slipped into where this was supposed to make me feel better. She'd sent me photographic evidence of her and her ex-boyfriend in bathrobes, in what was presumably their shared hotel room, after presumably showering in close proximity to each other, and this was meant to be reassuring. This was her idea of nothing happened. I wanted to laugh, but I also wanted to throw my phone into the toilet and maybe follow it down. The caption under the photo read, "See? Everything's fine. The conference is going great. Miss you. Miss you." She missed me, while wearing a bathrobe next to her ex-boyfriend, while sharing a bed with him, while doing exactly the thing I'd asked her not to do. But sure, she missed me. That made everything okay. I sat there trying to formulate a response, typing and deleting about 15 different messages. The first one was just a string of question marks. The second was, "Are you actually insane?" The third was a detailed breakdown of every single thing wrong with the photo she'd just sent. The fourth was just wow. But none of them felt adequate. None of them captured the sheer absurdity of what I was experiencing. Finally, I settled on, "Wow, your definition of nothing is impressive." I hit send before I could second guess it, and then I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I blocked her number. Just blocked it right there in that bathroom stall, severed that digital connection like I was cutting a rope bridge in an action movie. Then I poured myself a metaphorical drink, except it was 2 in the afternoon and I was at work, so I actually just sat there continuing to stare at my phone screen that now showed, "This contact has been blocked," where her name used to be. I walked back to my desk in a daze. My coworker Sarah asked me if I was okay, and I realized I must have looked how I felt, which was like someone who'd just witnessed something so stupid that it had fundamentally altered my brain chemistry. "I'm fine." I lied, and she gave me that look that women give when they know you're absolutely not fine, but they're going to respect your clearly fragile masculine need to pretend you are. I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Every time I tried to look at a spreadsheet or respond to an email, my brain would just replay that photo. The bathrobes, the smiles, Jason's arm around her shoulders, her casual LOL, like she was talking about the weather. That evening, I went to Frank's place because going home to our empty apartment felt about as appealing as diving into a pool of lemon juice with open wounds. He took one look at my face and said, "Oh no, what happened?" I showed him the texts and the photo, and I watched his expression go through several stages of disbelief, like he was watching a nature documentary about the mating habits of particularly stupid animals. "Bro," he said slowly, holding my phone and zooming in on the photo like he was searching for evidence that it was photoshopped or maybe from an alternate universe. "Bro, this is—" I don't even have words. "She sent me a photo," I said, grabbing the beer he'd handed me and taking a long drink. "Of her and Jason. In bathrobes. To prove that nothing happened." Frank set my phone down on his coffee table like it might explode. "That's not a wife," he said, shaking his head. "That's a walking lawsuit waiting to happen." That's a bad decision that gained sentience and got a driver's license. I laughed, but it came out bitter. You know what the worst part is? She actually thinks she's being reassuring. She actually thought that photo would make me feel better. Frank leaned back on his couch and looked at me with something between pity and admiration. What are you going to do? He asked. I blocked her, I said, and saying it out loud made it feel more real, more final. You blocked your wife? Frank asked, his eyebrows shooting up. I blocked my wife, I confirmed. Because apparently, watching my dignity die in real time via text message wasn't how I wanted to spend my Thursday. He raised his beer. To blocking people who send you photos in bathrobes with their exes, he said. May we all have that level of self-respect. We clinked bottles, and I drank, and tried not to think about what she'd do when she realized I'd blocked her. She probably tried calling first, and when that didn't work, she probably sent more texts that I'd never see. I imagined them piling up in some digital void, increasingly frantic messages asking why I wasn't responding, accusing me of being immature, maybe even more photos of her and Jason doing totally innocent conference things. Part of me wanted to unblock her just to see the messages, to witness the full scope of her delusion, but the smarter part of me knew that way lay madness. I'd seen enough. I'd seen her in a bathrobe with her ex, both of them smiling like they were on vacation together, and she genuinely thought that would ease my concerns. What more did I need to know? You know what I learned today? I said to Frank, staring at the ceiling of his living room. What's that? He asked. That when someone tells you, trust me, nothing will happen, and then sends you proof that something's happening while still insisting nothing's happening, you're not dealing with a trust issue. You're dealing with someone who's redefining reality to suit their narrative. Frank nodded sagely. That's deep, man. Also, you should probably talk to a lawyer. A lawyer. The word hung in the air like a sign from the universe. Yeah, I said quietly. Yeah, I probably should. I stayed at Frank's that night, crashing on his couch because the thought of going home to an apartment that still smelled like Clara's perfume and still had her stuff everywhere felt like volunteering for psychological torture. I lay there in the dark, listening to Frank snore in his bedroom, which ironically sounded exactly like a tractor, so maybe Clara's description of Jason was accurate. And I thought about that photo. The bathrobes, the smiles, the complete and utter lack of awareness about how inappropriate it all was. And I realized something. This wasn't going to end well. There was no version of this story where she came home and we laughed about it, and everything went back to normal. That ship had sailed the moment she got on the plane, and it had sunk completely the moment she sent me that photo. My phone, still blocked, still showing nothing from her, sat on Frank's coffee table, and I stared at it in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably lying in bed next to Jason, maybe scrolling through her phone wondering why I wasn't responding, maybe starting to realize that LOL and bathrobe selfies weren't the reassurance she thought they were. And me? I was lying on my buddy's couch, planning my exit strategy from a marriage I'd thought would last forever, all because my wife thought sharing a bed with her ex was just logistics. If this was trust, I thought, then I was ready to live in a world of complete and total skepticism. At least that world made sense. I woke up on Frank's couch with a neck cramp that felt like someone had replaced my spine with a bent coat hanger and a newfound clarity that only comes from hitting rock bottom and deciding to start digging in a different direction. Clara was off, finding herself, in a hotel room with her ex-boyfriend, and I was about to find myself a moving truck and a new apartment. Funny how personal growth works sometimes. Frank made coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through an old gym sock, but I drank it anyway because caffeine was caffeine, and I had a lot to do. You serious about this? He asked, watching me scroll through apartment listings on my phone while sitting at his kitchen table in yesterday's wrinkled work clothes. Dead serious, I said, clicking on a studio apartment that looked small but blessedly free of ex-boyfriends and wives who thought bathrobes were appropriate conference attire. I called in sick to work, which wasn't technically a lie because I was sick. Sick of this situation, sick of feeling like an idiot, sick of waiting around for the inevitable disaster to fully unfold. Then I called a moving company, and when they said they could have a truck there by noon, I almost kissed the phone. We're doing this today? Frank asked, looking slightly alarmed, like maybe he'd expected me to take a few weeks to think about it, and possibly talk myself out of it. We're doing this today, I confirmed. She wanted to go on her adventure, so I'm going on mine. Mine just involves fewer exes and more self-respect. Frank grabbed his keys. All right then. Let's go pack up your life before I have to be at work at 3. We got to my apartment, my and Clara's apartment, though the and Clara's part was feeling increasingly theoretical, and I stood outside the door for a moment, key in hand, preparing myself for what I was about to do. This wasn't just moving out. This was making a statement. This was drawing a line in the sand and then building a wall on my side of it. I unlocked the door and walked in, and the apartment looked exactly like it had 2 days ago, back when I was a married man whose biggest problem was deciding what to order for dinner. Now I was a married man whose wife was sleeping in a bathrobe next to her ex, and I was about to pack up everything I owned and disappear like a magician's assistant in a really depressing magic show. Where do we start? Frank asked, looking around at 5 years' worth of accumulated stuff, the kind of stuff that happens when two people merge their lives together and forget that maybe one day they'll need to separate it all again. My stuff, I said. Only my stuff. She can keep everything else. I don't want to take anything that'll make me think about her. We started in the bedroom, and let me tell you, there's something surreal about packing up your clothes while your wife is out of town sleeping with her ex. Every shirt I folded felt like a small act of rebellion. Every sock I threw into a box was a tiny middle finger to the universe. The movers showed up right on schedule, 2 guys named Mike and Tony who took one look at the situation. A clearly angry man packing up his stuff while his buddy provided moral support and understood immediately what was happening without anyone having to say it. They'd probably seen it a dozen times before. Mike even patted me on the shoulder and said, "Hang in there, buddy. It gets better." I wasn't sure if he was speaking from experience or just being nice, but I appreciated it anyway. We packed faster than I thought possible. Turns out when you're fueled by spite and the need to make a dramatic exit, you can move with the efficiency of a military operation. My clothes, my books, my PlayStation. Thank God she'd never tried to claim the PlayStation. My laptop, my random collection of things that were definitely mine and not communal property. Frank found my wedding photo in a drawer, the one we'd had framed and then apparently forgotten about because it had ended up under a pile of old mail and instruction manuals. He held it up. "What about this?" he asked. I looked at it. Clara and me on our wedding day, both smiling like we'd just won the lottery, both convinced we'd figured out the secret to happiness. Young, stupid us. Leave it, I said. She can keep the memories. I'm taking the lesson. By 2 o'clock, the apartment looked like a crime scene after a very thorough cleanup. Everything that was mine was gone. Everything that was hers or ours remained, creating this weird, empty space that looked like half a life had just vanished. The couch was still there, the beige one, the one we'd argued about. The TV was still mounted on the wall because technically we'd bought it together, and I wasn't petty enough to take it or leave a blank wall as some kind of statement, though I considered it. I stood in the living room one last time, looking around at what remained of my marriage, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just this weird, empty calm like I'd already mourned this relationship and moved on to the acceptance stage while she was still in denial somewhere 3 states away. I took out my phone and drafted a text, then remembered I'd blocked her. I unblocked her long enough to send one message. "Hope the conference is going well. I've moved out. Don't call." Then I blocked her again, grabbed the last box, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't take a moment to reflect or have some kind of meaningful goodbye to the space where we'd lived together. I just left, closed the door behind me, and got in Frank's car. The new apartment was a studio in a building that had clearly seen better days, but it was cheap, available immediately, and most importantly, it was mine. Just mine. No shared spaces, no joint decisions, no compromises about what color to paint the walls. The movers unloaded everything in about 30 minutes, and suddenly I was standing in my new place surrounded by boxes, officially separated from my wife even though we were still technically married. "You good?" Frank asked, looking around at the studio that was maybe a quarter of the size of the place I'd just left. "I'm great," I said, and surprisingly, I kind of meant it. Sure, my new place was small and smelled vaguely like the previous tenant had a smoking habit, but it was drama-free. No ex-boyfriends allowed. Frank left for work, and I started unpacking, which is when Clara started calling. My phone buzzed over and over, blocked calls showing up as blocked on my screen like little reminders that I'd made the right decision. She called maybe 15 times in an hour. Then the texts started coming through, or trying to, anyway. I could see the notifications that she was trying to reach me, but the messages themselves were blocked, disappearing into whatever digital void blocked messages go to. I imagine what they said. Probably started with confusion. Why aren't you answering? Then escalated to concern. Are you okay? And eventually landed on anger. This is ridiculous. Call me back right now. Around 6 that evening, she apparently gave up on the phone and decided to make a house call. I know this because Frank texted me. Bro, your wife just showed up at your old place. She's losing her mind. You okay? So she'd come back. Cut her trip short, or maybe it had ended. I didn't know and didn't particularly care. She'd gone to our apartment, her apartment now, I guess, and found it half empty, found that I'd actually followed through on what I'd said. I texted Frank back, I'm fine. Let her lose her mind. She earned it. He sent back. She's calling me now. What do I tell her? I thought about it for a moment. Tell her I'm in a place with 0 ex-lovers and a healthy mattress policy. 10 minutes later, there was banging on my door. Loud, aggressive banging that made my new neighbors probably regret that I'd moved in. I looked through the peephole, and there she was. Clara, still in her travel clothes, her face red and blotchy from crying or anger or both, her hair a mess. She looked like she'd come straight from the airport to my old place to here, and I wondered how she'd found my new address. Frank, probably. That traitor had caved under pressure. I know you're in there, she yelled through the door. Open this door right now. We need to talk. I stood on my side of the door, watching her through the peephole, and I felt remarkably calm. This woman, who 48 hours ago I'd been married to and living with, was now essentially a stranger banging on my door demanding entry to my space. Sorry, ma'am. I called through the door, not opening it. The husband you're looking for doesn't live here anymore. The banging stopped. I could see her through the peephole, standing there processing what I'd just said. That's not funny, she finally said, her voice cracking. Open the door. Please. We need to talk about this. Talk about what? About how she'd ignored every boundary I'd set. About the bathrobe photo. About how she'd prioritized a work trip with her ex over her marriage. I don't think we have anything to talk about, I said through the door. You made your choice. I made mine. Enjoy the apartment. She started crying then, real sobs that I could hear through the door, and part of me, the part that had loved her, that had married her, that had believed in us, felt guilty. But the bigger part, the part that had some self-respect left, stayed strong. Please, she said, her voice small now. Please just open the door. Let me explain. Explain what? How snoring like a tractor was supposed to be comforting. How bathrobes were professional attire. How sharing a bed with an ex was just logistics. No, I said simply. You chose this, Clara. You chose this when you got on that plane. You chose this when you sent me that photo. You chose this when you put him before us. Now you get to live with that choice. I heard her slide down the door, sitting on the floor outside my apartment, crying. My neighbors were definitely going to love me. I stood there for a while, listening to her sob, and I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her, no desire to open the door, no guilt about the situation. She'd burned this bridge herself, and now she was surprised that she couldn't cross it anymore. Eventually, she got up. I heard her footsteps walking away, heard the ding of the elevator. I looked through the peephole and confirmed the hallway was empty. Then I went back to unpacking my life, one box at a time, in my studio apartment that was small and imperfect, but absolutely, completely mine. My phone buzzed one more time. Another block call from Clara. I turned my phone off entirely, put on some music, and kept unpacking. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably calling Frank again, or her friends, or maybe even Jason, telling them all about her terrible husband who'd abandoned her over nothing. But here, in my new place, I was just a guy starting over, and honestly, that felt pretty damn good. I should have known that Clara wouldn't give up after one failed attempt at my door. The woman had the persistence of a telemarketer and the strategic thinking of someone who'd clearly never heard the phrase, quit while you're behind. But even I, in all my cynical wisdom about how far she'd go to avoid taking responsibility for her actions, didn't expect her to deploy the nuclear option. She went to my mother. My mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Okafor, a woman who once made a grown man cry at a PTA meeting just by raising one eyebrow. A woman who had perfected the art of silent judgment decades before I was born. A woman who could end arguments by simply existing in a room. Clara, in her infinite wisdom and apparent death wish, decided that my mother would be her ally in this situation. I found out about this tactical error 3 days after I'd moved into my new place when my phone rang with a call from my mom. Now, my mother doesn't call often. She's not the "let's chat about our feelings" type. She's more the "I'm calling because something important has happened and you need to know about it immediately" type. So when I saw her name on my screen, my first thought was that someone had died. My second thought was that maybe I was about to wish I was the one who had died. "Hello, Mom," I answered, bracing myself. "Your wife came to visit me today," she said. No greeting, no preamble, just straight into it like a lawyer presenting evidence. I sat down on my couch, my new couch that I'd bought at IKEA for $200, and assembled myself in a therapeutic rage and prepared myself for whatever was coming. "Did she now?" I said, keeping my voice neutral because you never knew which side my mother was going to take in any given situation, and the last thing I needed was her telling me I was being too harsh or not harsh enough. "She told me a very interesting story," Mom continued, and I could hear that tone, that specific tone that meant she'd already made up her mind about something and was just waiting for me to confirm her conclusion. "I'm sure she did," I said. "She's good at stories. Very creative with her version of reality." There was a pause, and I could practically hear my mother's eyebrow raising through the phone. "She said you abandoned her because she went on a work trip. She said you're being unreasonable and controlling." She cried quite a lot. It was very dramatic. I took a deep breath. "Mom, did she mention that the work trip involved sharing a bed with her ex-boyfriend?" Another pause, longer this time. "She may have left that detail out," my mother said slowly. "She focused more on the part where you moved out without warning and won't speak to her." Of course she did. Of course Clara had gone to my mother with a carefully edited version of events that made her look like the victim of a cruel and heartless husband. "Let me fill in the gaps," I said, and I told my mother everything. The initial announcement, the argument, the bathrobe photo, the whole sordid tale of my wife's journey into what I was now calling the worst decision tour 2025. When I finished, my mother was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, you still there?" I asked. "I'm here," she said, and her voice had that quality it got when she was processing something that had genuinely surprised her, which didn't happen often. "That girl came to my house, sat in my living room, drank my tea, and lied to my face." "Technically," I said, "she just omitted key information. That's different from lying in the same way that jumping off a building is different from falling. The result is the same, but one sounds more intentional." My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "Your wife shared a bed with her ex-boyfriend and then sent you photos in bathrobes," she said, like she was testing the words to see if they sounded as insane out loud as they did in her head. "That's correct," I confirmed. "And then when I moved out because, basic self-respect, she decided to come cry to you about how mean I'm being." "That girl," my mother said, and I could hear her shifting into what I privately called Judge Okafor mode, "has more nerve than sense." Coming from my mother, this was roughly equivalent to someone else saying, "I hope she steps on Legos for the rest of her life." "So you're on my side?" I asked, needing the confirmation. "Side?" my mother repeated. "There are no sides here. There's right and there's wrong. And that girl is so far on the wrong side, she'd need GPS to find her way back to questionable judgment." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. My mother's approval wasn't something I needed for validation. I was a grown man who could make his own decisions, but having it anyway felt good. "What did you say to her?" I asked, curious about how that conversation had gone. "I let her finish her story," Mom said. "I listened very patiently while she talked about trust and personal growth and how you were being insecure. Then I asked her one simple question." "What question?" I asked, leaning forward even though she couldn't see me. "I asked her if she would be comfortable with you sharing a bed with your ex-girlfriend for a work trip." The silence that followed must have been spectacular. "What did she say?" I asked. "She said that was different," my mother replied, and I could hear the eye roll in her voice. I asked how it was different. "She said because you're a man and men can't be trusted." So I told her that if she didn't trust men, why did she trust Jason? She didn't have an answer for that. I was grinning now, picturing Clara trying to logic her way through that trap my mother had set. "Then what happened?" I asked. "Then," my mother said, with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a chess game in 4 moves, I told her that if she wanted self-discovery, she should have gone to therapy instead of her ex's bed. I also told her that trust isn't something you demand while doing untrustworthy things. Trust is something you earn by behaving in a trustworthy manner. God, I loved my mother. How did she take that? I asked. She tried to cry harder, Mom said dismissively. She does this thing where she makes her eyes very big and her lip quivers. I assume it works on weak-minded people. I am not weak-minded. No, you are certainly not, I agreed. Then she said she was pregnant. My mother continued, and I felt my stomach drop to somewhere around my knees. She what? I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. She said she's pregnant. With your baby. She thought this would change my mind about supporting her. My brain was spinning. Pregnant. Clara was pregnant. We're claiming to be pregnant. With my baby. Except we hadn't had sex in weeks before she left for that trip because we'd been arguing constantly. The timeline was fuzzy at best. What did you say? I asked, gripping my phone so hard I was worried I might crack the screen. I asked her how far along she was. My mother said calmly, like we were discussing the weather and not a potential pregnancy that could complicate everything. She said about a month, maybe 6 weeks. She wasn't sure. She was very vague about it. A month. 6 weeks. Right around the time of the trip. Right around the time she'd been sharing a bed with Jason. Mom, I said slowly. The math isn't adding up here. I know, my mother replied. I did the math too. That's why I asked her if she was certain you were the father. I could only imagine Clara's face at that question. She got very offended. My mother continued. Said of course you were the father. Said she'd never been with anyone else. Said I was insulting her character. So I told her that her character had already been sufficiently insulted by her own actions, and I was simply asking logical questions. You're my hero, I said, and I meant it. I didn't raise a fool, my mother said firmly. And I didn't raise a doormat. That girl made her choices, and now she wants you to deal with the consequences while she plays victim. I don't think so. So what happened then? I asked, needing to hear the rest. I told her she needed to leave, my mother said simply. I told her that if she didn't leave my gate in 5 seconds, I would release Bruno, and he only bites people who lie. Bruno was my mother's German Shepherd, a dog who was actually the sweetest thing on 4 legs, but looked intimidating enough to make grown men cross the street. Mom, Bruno wouldn't hurt a fly, I said, laughing despite the situation. She doesn't know that, my mother replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. And apparently, the timing was perfect because Bruno chose that exact moment to growl. I didn't train him to do that. He just seemed to understand the assignment. I was full on laughing now, the kind of laugh that felt good after days of stress and anger and confusion. She left faster than your salary during December, my mother added, which was her favorite way of describing anything that moved quickly, referring to how money seemed to evaporate during the holiday season. I saw her practically running to her car. She almost tripped on the driveway. Thank you, Mom, I said, feeling genuinely grateful. Thank you for having my back. I always have your back, she said. But more importantly, I have common sense. And common sense says that when your wife chooses to sleep with her ex-boyfriend, you don't wait around to see how that story ends. You write a new story. We talked for a few more minutes about the pregnancy claim, about how I should probably prepare myself for that to be used as leverage, about how I should talk to a lawyer regardless of whether it was true or not. My mother, despite her age and her traditional views on many things, was surprisingly practical when it came to protecting her children. If she is pregnant, my mother said before we hung up, and if it is yours, we'll deal with that. But you get a DNA test. You don't take her word for anything anymore. She's proven that her word is worth about as much as a chocolate teapot. A chocolate teapot. I repeated, amused. Sounds nice, looks nice, but the moment things heat up, it's useless, she explained. That's your wife. Pretty packaging, no substance. After we hung up, I sat on my cheap IKEA couch in my small studio apartment and processed everything. Clara was pregnant, or claiming to be, and she'd tried to use my own mother against me, which had backfired so spectacularly that she'd been chased off by a German Shepherd who apparently had better judgment than she did. I should have been more worried about the pregnancy news, but honestly, after the bathrobe photo and the nothing happened texts, I was operating under the assumption that nothing Clara said could be taken at face value anymore. If she was pregnant, we'd do a DNA test. If she wasn't, then it was just another manipulation tactic in her increasingly desperate playbook. I texted Frank. Clara went to my mom. It didn't go well for Clara. He texted back immediately. Your mom is savage. What happened? I gave him the highlights, including the Bruno moment and the pregnancy claim. His response was just a series of skull emojis followed by, Bro, your life is a soap opera. When's the episode where you find out you have an evil twin? I laughed and texted back. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised. But underneath the jokes and the laughter, I felt something solid forming. A resolve. Clara had made her choices, and now she was making up stories to justify them. She'd gone to my mother expecting sympathy and got reality instead. And now there was apparently a baby in the picture, or the claim of a baby, which would need to be verified because trusting Clara at this point would be like trusting a used car salesman who'd already sold you a lemon. I looked around my small apartment, at the boxes I was still unpacking, at the life I was rebuilding from scratch, and I thought, this is better. This uncertainty, this small space, this starting over, it was all better than staying in a marriage with someone who thought bathrobes and ex-boyfriends were acceptable business attire. My phone buzzed with one more text from my mother. Come for dinner Sunday. I'll make your favorite. And we'll talk about lawyers. I smiled and texted back. Thanks, Mom. I'll be there. At least I had one woman in my life I could count on. A month passed, and I'd almost convinced myself that I was going to get through this whole disaster without any more Clara-related drama. I should have known better. The universe has this way of lulling you into a false sense of security right before it dropkicks you in the face with a steel-toed boot of chaos. I'd settled into my new place, bought actual furniture instead of living like a college student with a folding chair and a sleeping bag, and had even started going to the gym because apparently that's what people do when their lives fall apart. They get buff out of spite. I was finally getting some peace, some actual honest-to-God tranquility where I could come home from work, make dinner, watch TV, and not worry about whether my wife was currently sharing hotel rooms with her ex-boyfriend. Then, on a perfectly normal Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I'd learned to be suspicious of unexpected doorbells ever since Clara had shown up that first time, so I approached the door like it might be hiding a landmine. I looked through the peephole, and there she was. Again, Clara, standing outside my door looking like she'd just come from a funeral or maybe a very sad job interview. She was wearing this flowy dress that looked deliberately chosen to be both innocent and sympathy-inducing, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. I recognized the costume immediately. This was her please feel sorry for me outfit, the one she wore when she needed something and planned to use tears and guilt to get it. I considered not opening the door. I seriously stood there for a good 30 seconds, just watching her through the peephole, debating whether I could pretend I wasn't home, even though she could probably hear me breathing on the other side of the door like some kind of creepy stalker in reverse. But curiosity won out, because despite everything, I kind of wanted to know what fresh hell she was about to deliver to my doorstep. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway like a bouncer at a club who was pretty sure the person trying to enter was going to cause problems. Hi, she said softly, and her voice had that quality that women's voices get when they're about to ask for something they know you're not going to want to give. Clara, I said neutrally, going for a tone that conveyed absolutely zero emotion, like I was greeting a stranger who'd asked me for directions. What do you want? She flinched a little at the coldness in my voice, and I felt a small, petty satisfaction at that. Good. Let her feel uncomfortable. Let her experience just a fraction of what she'd put me through. Can I come in? She asked, glancing past me into my apartment like she was trying to see how I'd decorated without her input. No, I said simply. Her eyes widened a bit. No, that's what I said, I confirmed. Whatever you need to say, you can say it from right there. She looked around the hallway nervously, probably worried about neighbors overhearing, which told me that whatever she was about to say was going to be something she'd prefer to keep private. Too bad. Privacy was a privilege she'd lost when she'd sent me bathrobe selfies with her ex. Fine, she said, taking a deep breath and placing one hand on her stomach in a gesture that was so deliberate it might as well have been choreographed. I'm pregnant. I looked at her hand on her stomach, then at her face, then back at her stomach. Congratulations, I said, my voice completely flat. Who's the lucky guy? Her face did this complicated journey through several emotions: confusion, hurt, anger, and finally settling on wounded indignation. What? she asked, like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. You heard me, I said, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed. Congratulations on the pregnancy. I'm sure Jason will be thrilled. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, like she had them ready to deploy at a moment's notice. It's yours, she said, her voice breaking on the last word. The baby is yours. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation just hit me all at once, and I laughed so hard I had to brace myself against the doorframe to stay upright. It was the kind of laugh that probably made me look slightly unhinged, but at that moment I didn't care. Sweetheart, I said when I could finally speak again, wiping tears from my eyes. Biology called. It says the math ain't matting. She took a step toward me, reaching out like she was going to touch my arm, and I stepped back into my apartment, maintaining the distance between us. Don't, I said. Just don't. You're the only man I've been with, she insisted, and the tears were flowing freely now, running down her cheeks in what I had to admit was a fairly convincing display of emotion. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't seen the bathrobe photo and received the nothing happened texts, I might have actually believed her. Really? I asked, tilting my head to the side like I was genuinely considering her claim. The only man. So what was Jason then? A figment of my imagination? A hologram? Because last I checked, you shared a bed with him for 3 days, sent me photographic evidence of you two in bathrobes looking very cozy, and now, conveniently, you're pregnant. She shook her head vigorously. Nothing happened with Jason, she said, recycling that same tired line she'd been using since the beginning. I told you, nothing happened. We just slept. That's it. This baby is yours. I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, trying to see if there was any part of the woman I'd married still in there somewhere. But all I saw was someone who'd convinced herself that her version of reality was the truth, someone who could lie while crying and still believe she was the victim. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You want me to believe that you shared a bed with your ex-boyfriend for 3 nights. Nothing happened despite the bathrobe photos and the general inappropriateness of the entire situation, and now you're pregnant with my baby. A baby that was conceived right around the time of your little trip. Yes, she said desperately. Yes, exactly. I know how it looks, but I swear nothing happened with Jason. This is your baby. Our baby. I rubbed my face with both hands, feeling exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. This was soul-deep exhaustion, the kind that comes from dealing with someone who's rewriting history as they go. Clara, I said, trying one more time to inject some reality into this conversation. Unless Jason's DNA teleported through the power of shared pillow space, that's a strong maybe on paternity. She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I was questioning this. How can you say that? She asked, her voice rising. How can you accuse me of that? I'm telling you the truth. Your track record with truth isn't exactly stellar, I pointed out. You told me nothing would happen on that trip. You sent me photos that suggested otherwise. You told my mother a completely different story about why we separated. So forgive me if I'm not immediately accepting your word as gospel. She was crying harder now, the kind of crying that made her face blotchy and her nose run, and normally that would have bothered me because I'd always hated seeing her cry. But now it just felt like manipulation, like she was using tears as a weapon because logic wasn't working. This is unbelievable, she said, her voice thick with tears. I come here to tell you that we're having a baby, and you accuse me of cheating. What kind of man are you? I felt my jaw tighten. The kind who has eyes and a functioning brain, I said. The kind who knows that when someone shares a bed with their ex, and then shows up pregnant a month later, questions are reasonable. The kind who's learned that trust has to be earned, not demanded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. I want you to be there, she said quietly. For the baby. I want us to work this out. To be a family. A family. She wanted us to be a family. The same woman who'd prioritized a work trip with her ex over her marriage now wanted to play house, because there was allegedly a baby involved. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. If you're really pregnant, and that's still an if in my book, you're going to get a DNA test. Not after the baby is born, not when it's convenient, but as soon as it's medically safe. Until then, I'm not acknowledging anything. Her face crumpled. You don't believe me, she said. Like this was some surprising revelation instead of the obvious conclusion any sane person would reach. You're catching on, I said. No, I don't believe you. You've given me absolutely no reason to believe anything you say. You've lied, you've manipulated, you've tried to play victim while doing objectively wrong things. So no, Clara, I don't believe you're pregnant with my baby. I believe you're pregnant, maybe. I believe you want me to think it's mine. But whether it actually is, that's a question for science, not faith. She stood there for a moment, and I watched her cycle through her options. She could keep crying. That wasn't working. She could get angry. That wouldn't work either. She could try being sweet and reasonable. Ship had sailed on that about a month ago when she'd sent me bathrobe photos. Fine, she finally said, her voice cold now, all the tears and vulnerability evaporating like they'd never been there. Fine, you want a DNA test? We'll do a DNA test. And when it proves that you're the father, you're going to feel like such an asshole. I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you give someone when you're about to call their bluff. You know what? I can live with that. I'd rather feel like an asshole for questioning paternity than feel like an idiot for accepting it without proof. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt that says, "World's Most Trusting Husband," and it didn't fit right. She stepped closer, pointing her finger at me like a weapon. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice shaking with emotion I couldn't quite identify. Anger, hurt, fear, maybe all three. When this baby is born and you've missed everything, all the appointments and the preparations and the moments, you're going to regret pushing me away. I looked at her finger pointing at my chest and then back at her face. Sweetheart, I already regret plenty. I regret marrying someone who thought sharing a bed with her ex was acceptable. I regret not seeing the red flags earlier. I regret wasting 5 years on someone who clearly didn't respect our marriage. But this? Asking for proof before I accept responsibility for a baby that might not be mine? This is going to be pretty low on my regret list. She made a sound that was half sob, half scream, and turned on her heel, storming down the hallway toward the elevator. She jabbed the button repeatedly, like a salt on an elevator button was going to make it arrive faster, and when the doors finally opened, she stepped in and turned to face me. You'll be sorry, she yelled as the doors closed, her final dramatic statement delivered like the ending of a soap opera episode. I stood in my doorway watching the elevator doors close on her face, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, no sadness. Just relief that she was leaving. I went back into my apartment and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. A baby. Possibly my baby. Possibly Jason's baby. Possibly nobody's baby, because she might not even be pregnant, and this was all just an elaborate guilt trip designed to get me back. I pulled out my phone and texted Frank. Clara just showed up. Says she's pregnant. Claims it's mine. His response came immediately. Holy shit. What are you gonna do? I typed back. DNA test. Not accepting anything without proof. He sent back a gif of someone saying, "Smart man," followed by, "Want me to come over? You okay?" I thought about it. Was I okay? By any reasonable standard, I should be freaking out. My estranged wife had just announced a pregnancy that I might be responsible for, and the circumstances around the conception were shadier than a tree farm. But honestly, I felt calm. I'd learned over the past month that Clara's drama only had power over me if I let it. If I engaged with it, if I accepted her version of reality, if I let guilt and obligation override common sense. I'm good. I texted Frank back. Just another day in paradise. He sent back. Your definition of paradise is seriously messed up. I smiled and put my phone down. He wasn't wrong. I made myself dinner, chicken and rice, nothing fancy, and ate it while watching a basketball game, trying to process everything that had just happened. A baby. Maybe. The word maybe was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, carrying the weight of trust destroyed and truth questioned and a marriage that had imploded spectacularly. But I wasn't going to let maybe turn into definitely without proof. I'd trusted Clara before, believed her when she said nothing would happen, accepted her explanations even when they didn't quite make sense. And where had that gotten me? Looking at bathrobe photos and moving into a studio apartment at 32 years old. So no more blind trust. No more accepting things at face value. If she was pregnant, we'd prove it. If it was mine, we'd prove that too. And if it wasn't, well, then we'd have a whole different conversation about why she tried to pin someone else's baby on me. I finished my dinner, washed my dishes, and went to bed in my IKEA bed frame that I'd assembled with my own 2 hands. And I slept better than I had in months, because at least I knew that whatever happened next, I wasn't going to be anyone's fool twice. A few months later, guess what arrived in my mailbox? Not a birthday card, not a coupon for pizza, but a goddamn lawsuit. Apparently, I was now officially the deadbeat father of Baby Trust. Yes, she actually named the hypothetical baby trust in the legal documents, which was either poetic irony or just Clara being her usual dramatic self. The papers claimed I'd abandoned my pregnant wife after she went on a mutual bed-sharing business trip, which sounded like something from a really bad romance novel where the author didn't understand how business trips actually work. I called Barrister Kim, a lawyer Frank had recommended who specialized in family law and had apparently seen every flavor of marital disaster imaginable. He nearly spit out his coffee when he read the filing. "She really wrote that you abandoned her after a mutual bed-sharing business trip?" he asked, reading the document like it was written in alien hieroglyphics. "Is that what we're calling adultery now? Mutual bed-sharing. Welcome to my life," I said. The courtroom was packed like we were about to watch a championship game instead of the dissolution of my marriage and possibly my financial future. Clara showed up looking like she'd raided the wardrobe department of a Lifetime movie, carrying the baby like a prop in the world's saddest theatrical production. Her lawyer, some guy in a suit that probably cost more than my car, immediately went into full sympathy mode, painting a picture of poor abandoned Clara and her innocent baby while the cruel husband refused to take responsibility. Then it was our turn. Barrister Kim stood up with a folder full of evidence. Every text message, every nothing happened photo, that bathrobe selfie that had started this whole mess, and presented them to the judge like a prosecutor at a murder trial. The judge's eyebrow climbed so high on his forehead, I thought it might leave the building entirely and file its own restraining order. He looked at Clara, then at the photos, then back at Clara, and I could see him mentally calculating how someone could possibly think this made them look innocent. "DNA test," the judge ordered, his voice carrying that tone of someone who'd seen too much stupid in one day and needed it to stop immediately. "We'll reconvene when we have the results." Clara's face went pale, and her lawyer whispered something to her that made her nod frantically. 3 weeks later, we were back in the same courtroom, same seats, but the energy was completely different. This time Clara looked like she was attending her own funeral. The judge opened the envelope with the kind of deliberate slowness that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath, like we were waiting for the results of a reality show elimination. He pulled out the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it silently while the tension in the room built to levels that could have powered a small city. Then he looked up, his eyes moving from me to Clara to the baby she was holding, and he spoke in a voice that cut through the silence like a knife through butter. "The result is negative. Mr. Okafor is not the biological father." You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom, followed immediately by the sound of Clara's entire defense strategy crashing to the floor like a chandelier at the end of a disaster movie. She froze, her face going through more color changes than a chameleon having an identity crisis. Red, white, then a sickly green that suggested she was either about to vomit or pass out or possibly both. She chose the latter, fainting dramatically and sliding out of her chair like she was auditioning for a soap opera called The Betrayal Chronicles, when lies meet reality. Even the court clerk sighed and muttered, "Ma'am, please don't fall on the paperwork," which under any other circumstances would have been hilarious, but right now felt like the most reasonable thing anyone had said in months. Her lawyer scrambled to help her, fanning her face with a legal pad, while shooting me looks like somehow this was my fault for not being the father of a baby that wasn't mine. Barrister Kim leaned over and whispered, "Told you she's allergic to the truth." I sat there trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't the father. The baby that Clara had tried to pin on me, that she'd used to garner sympathy and file lawsuits and probably tell all our mutual friends about what a terrible person I was, that baby wasn't mine. Which meant that at some point during or around that business trip with Jason, something had definitely happened, despite all her nothing happened protests and bathrobe photos and tears. I felt vindicated and exhausted and angry all at once, a weird cocktail of emotions that made me want to both celebrate and take a very long nap. I could have walked away right there, taken my vindication and gone home to celebrate with Frank and a bottle of something expensive that I'd saved for a special occasion. But you know what? I didn't want to just walk away. I wanted justice. I wanted accountability. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted a little revenge sprinkled on top like the world's most satisfying seasoning on an already delicious meal of vindication. So we filed a countersuit for defamation, emotional distress, and legal fees. Because apparently, when your wife tries to pin someone else's baby on you and drags you through court, you're entitled to some compensation for the sheer audacity of it all. The next hearing was somehow even more satisfying than the DNA results. Clara showed up looking significantly less put together than before, probably because it's hard to maintain that innocent victim aesthetic when everyone in the courtroom knows you're a liar. The judge, who I was starting to genuinely like because he seemed as fed up with this circus as I was, reviewed our countersuit with the same raised eyebrow that had become his signature expression during this whole ordeal. He didn't even need much convincing. The evidence was all there. The false paternity claim, the public accusations, the lawsuit that had cost me thousands in legal fees to defend against something that was never true in the first place. Mrs. Okafor, the judge said, and I noticed he still used her married name even though that marriage was deader than disco. You will be responsible for paying a portion of Mr. Okafor's legal fees. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was enough. Enough to cover Barrister Kim's retainer, enough to buy myself a nice vacation, alone, with no exes, no drama, just silence and Wi-Fi, and maybe one of those fruity drinks with an umbrella in it. As we left the courthouse, Clara tried to approach me, probably to explain or apologize or maybe just to see if she could salvage anything from the wreckage of her lies. I didn't give her the chance. You ruined my life, she mumbled as I walked past her, barely audible but loud enough that I caught it. I stopped, turned around, and smiled at her. Not a mean smile, not even an angry smile, just the smile of someone who'd finally reached the other side of a nightmare and could look back at it with something resembling peace. No, Clara, I said calmly. You ran a demolition company called Bad Choices Limited, and I just watched the show. The only thing I ruined was your plan to make your mistakes my responsibility. Her face crumpled, but I was already walking away, Barrister Kim beside me giving me a subtle nod of approval. Months passed, and peace finally returned to my life like a long-lost friend who'd been on vacation. Real peace, the kind where you wake up and don't immediately check your phone for new disasters. I sold Clara's engagement ring, the one I'd stupidly held on to thinking maybe there was some sentimental value there, and used the money to pay off the remaining legal fees. It felt poetic somehow, using the symbol of our failed marriage to cover the cost of its legal death. I heard through mutual friends, the few who still talked to me after Clara had undoubtedly spread her version of events, that Jason had vanished. Apparently, the gym-loving ex with the hair gel and the flexible morals had heard about the baby and the paternity test and decided that maybe international waters were a safer place to be. He'd moved abroad, location unknown, leaving Clara to deal with the consequences of their nothing-happened business trip all by herself. Clara, according to those same friends, had moved back in with her parents, probably subjecting them to daily lectures about trust and personal growth and how the universe was conspiring against her. I imagined her sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and old yearbooks, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Spoiler alert. It went wrong when she decided sharing a bed with her ex was an acceptable business practice. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about that first day when she'd walked into our living room with that face, the CEO of Bad Decisions Incorporated face, and announced her travel plans. I'd think about how she'd said, "Trust me, nothing will happen," with such conviction, such absolute certainty. And I'd laugh. Not a bitter laugh anymore, but the kind of laugh you have when you've survived something ridiculous and can finally see the humor in it. Because now I knew with absolute certainty, that when someone says, "Trust me," while packing for a trip with their ex, what they really mean is start preparing your exit plan and maybe consult a lawyer while you're at it. So here's my advice, gentlemen, free of charge from someone who learned it the hard way. If your wife ever says, "It's just a private room," or "We're just sharing a bed," or "Nothing will happen," you tell her, politely but firmly, "Good. You can be privately single too. Trust your gut. Respect yourself. And never, ever accept bathrobe photos as evidence that everything's fine. Because somewhere between those bathrobes and a courtroom full of lawyers, There's a truth waiting to ruin your whole day. Better to face it early than to spend months pretending it doesn't exist. I'm doing good now. Great, actually. My studio apartment turned into a one-bedroom. My IKEA furniture got upgraded to actual adult furniture. And my life? My life became mine again, free from drama and lies and ex-boyfriends with hair gel. And honestly, that's worth more than any marriage certificate ever was. My wife dumped me on my birthday with, "We'll always be friends, though." I replied, "Absolutely." Weeks later, she found out friendship didn't include rent money, emotional support, or car repairs, especially once I started dating her neighbor. So picture this. There I was, 32 years old, standing in my own living room with a grocery store sheet cake flickering like a small fire hazard in front of me, and I'm thinking to myself, this is it. This is the moment Harper finally surprises me with something good. Maybe a watch, you know? One of those classy ones that makes you look like you've got your life together even when you're just checking how late you are to everything. Or maybe she'd booked us a trip somewhere tropical where the biggest decision I'd have to make was whether to get the fish tacos or the shrimp tacos. I'm a simple man with simple dreams, and honestly, after 5 years of marriage where my birthday gifts had ranged from socks to a Costco-sized bottle of multivitamins, I figured the universe owed me something decent. The pizza boxes were stacked on the counter like the Leaning Tower of pepperoni, and I'd already eaten 3 slices because nobody else was showing up to this party. Harper had said she wanted it to be intimate this year, which I thought meant romantic. Turns out it meant she didn't want witnesses to what was about to go down. She was standing there in her favorite athleisure outfit, the one she wore when she was being serious about yoga, but really just wanted to look cute while drinking overpriced smoothies, and she had this look on her face. You know the look, the one that says, "I've been rehearsing something in the shower for 3 weeks, and I'm about to unleash it on you with the confidence of a person who just finished a self-help audiobook." I should have known something was up when she cleared her throat and clasped her hands together like she was about to deliver a keynote speech at a conference for people who peaked in college. "Logan," she said, and the way she said my name made my stomach drop faster than my credit score after we bought that stupid farmhouse table she insisted we needed. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I've come to realize that we've grown apart. We're not the same people we were when we got married, and I think it's time we acknowledge that our journey together has reached its natural conclusion. I blinked. Once. Twice. Waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. She kept going, and I swear to God, she hit every single breakup cliché like she was going down a checklist. "It's not you, it's me." Check. "I need to find myself." Check. "You deserve someone who can give you what you need." Check, check, and check. She even threw in something about embracing my authentic self and honoring my truth, which made me want to ask her what self-help guru she'd been binge-watching on YouTube at 2 in the morning, but I kept my mouth shut because honestly, I was too stunned to form words. The candles on my birthday cake were melting into the frosting by this point, little rivers of wax creating abstract art that somehow felt like a metaphor for my marriage. She wrapped up her TED Talk with the classic closer, delivered with the kind of earnest eye contact that people use when they're trying to convince you they're doing you a favor. "But Logan, we'll always be friends though." Friends. Friends. The woman who'd promised to be my partner through sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part, was now offering me the same social contract I had with the guy who delivered my Amazon packages. I felt my brain short-circuit for a second, like when you accidentally bite into tinfoil, but then something clicked. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the 3 beers I'd already knocked back thinking this was going to be a celebration. Maybe it was divine intervention. But in that moment, standing there with wax-covered cake and cold pizza, I felt this weird sense of calm wash over me, and I smiled. I smiled so wide my face hurt. "Absolutely," I said, nodding like I'd just been offered a promotion instead of a divorce. "Friends. Yeah, that sounds great, Harper. Really great." She looked relieved, like she'd been expecting me to lose my mind or beg her to reconsider or do something dramatic that would require her to call her mom and spend 3 hours dissecting my toxic behavior. Instead, I was standing there grinning like a dude who just found out his student loans got forgiven. She stepped forward and hugged me. Actually hugged me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders and squeezing like we'd just made some beautiful, mature decision together. "Oh, Logan," she sighed into my shoulder. I'm so glad you're handling this so maturely. This is why I know we can make this friendship work. What Harper didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known while she was standing there feeling all proud of herself for communicating her needs, or whatever garbage her therapist had told her, was that my brain was already 3 steps ahead. See, while she was hugging me and probably mentally planning how she'd spin this story to make herself look like the reasonable one, I was doing math. Friendship math. The kind of math that involves adding up all the things a husband does versus all the things a friend does, and realizing there's a massive gap in that Venn diagram. Friends don't wake up at 6 in the morning to make you a latte with that specific almond milk from Whole Foods that costs more per ounce than liquid gold. Friends don't jump your car battery every other week because you refuse to admit your vehicle is dying and keep saying, it's just the cold weather, even though it's July. Friends definitely don't spend their Saturdays unclogging your bathroom sink because you insist on washing your hair in there even though I've told you 1,000 times that the drain can't handle that much conditioner, Harper. Friends don't do that. But she didn't know any of this yet. She was still riding the high of her brave decision to end things, still feeling like the protagonist in her own inspirational movie about a woman who finally chose herself. She pulled back from the hug and looked at me with actual gratitude in her eyes, like I'd just given her a gift instead of watching my marriage implode on my birthday. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. I was so worried you'd make this difficult. Nope, I said, still smiling that slightly manic smile. Not difficult at all. We're friends now. Friends are easy. She smiled back, and I watched her walk to the bedroom, probably to call her best friend Jenna and tell her how amazingly I'd taken the news, how evolved I was being about the whole thing. Meanwhile, I stood there next to my birthday cake, watching the last candle sputter out, and I started mentally drafting what I liked to call the friendship invoice. Every single friend benefit she thought she'd keep, every assumption she'd made about how this new arrangement would work. I was about to introduce her to a concept she'd somehow missed in all her self-discovery. Actions have consequences, and friendship is a two-way street, baby. I cut myself a piece of cake, poured another beer, and toasted to absolutely nothing. Happy birthday to me, I whispered to my empty living room. And happy friendship day to you, Harper. This was going to be fun. The next morning arrived with all the grace of a freight train crashing through a library, and I woke up feeling weirdly energized for someone whose marriage had just gone up in smoke less than 12 hours ago. I could hear Harper moving around in the kitchen, and based on the sounds, cabinet doors opening and closing with increasing frustration, the clink of her favorite mug being set down a little too hard, I could tell she was expecting her usual morning routine. You know, the one where I played the role of personal barista, short-order cook, mechanic, and emotional support human all before 8 in the morning. I laid there in bed for a minute, staring at the ceiling and listening to her huff and sigh like someone had personally wronged her by not having breakfast ready. Any other day, any other week, any other year of our marriage, I would have dragged myself out of bed, shuffled to the kitchen in my pajamas, and started the whole song and dance. Fire up the espresso machine that cost more than my first car, steam the almond milk to exactly 140 degrees because anything hotter ruins the flavor profile, toast her gluten-free bread that tastes like cardboard dipped in sadness, and have everything ready by the time she finished her morning skincare routine that involved more steps than a NASA launch sequence. But here's the thing about being demoted from husband to friend. Friends don't do that. Friends don't anticipate your every need and cater to your every whim like you're some sort of benevolent dictator. Friends are equals. Friends split checks at restaurants and take turns driving and definitely, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, do not make you custom lattes at the crack of dawn. So I got up, got dressed, and walked right past her in the kitchen. She was standing there in her silk pajamas, the expensive ones she bought during her I deserve to treat myself phase that lasted approximately 8 months and drained our savings account. And she looked at me with this expectant expression, like a golden retriever waiting for someone to throw the ball. Morning, she said, sweet as artificial sweetener, eyeing the coffee machine meaningfully. Morning, friend, I replied, grabbing my keys and phone. I'd already made myself a coffee. Black, simple, the way God intended, in a travel mug, and I was heading out the door. But not before leaving her a little present on the counter. A note. written on the back of one of her countless vision board printouts that she'd scattered around the house, like some kind of manifestation confetti. The note read, "Happy Friendship Day? Thought you might want to know the toaster has a timer function. Works great as an alarm clock if you need to remember to make your own breakfast. Also, friends typically don't make each other coffee, but there's a great tutorial on YouTube if you need help with the espresso machine. Have a blessed day." I heard her pick up the note just as I was closing the front door, and the sound she made, somewhere between a gasp and a confused squeak, fueled me all the way to my truck. I had to stop myself from doing a little victory dance in the driveway, because I'm pretty sure the neighbors were already getting enough entertainment from our imploding marriage without me adding choreography to it. Work that day was fantastic, mainly because I spent most of it daydreaming about my new life as Harper's friend and what that was going to look like. No more splitting the mortgage on a house, she insisted we buy, even though it was 30 minutes outside my work radius. No more utilities in my name, while she ran the heater like we were trying to recreate the surface temperature of the sun. No more being the default handyman for every single thing that broke, malfunctioned, or made a weird noise. I felt lighter than I had in years, like someone had been making me wear a weighted vest, and I'd finally gotten permission to take it off. By the time I got home that evening, I'd already made my decision. I was moving out. That weekend, I'd already texted my buddy Marcus, who had that friend with the apartment complex, and boom, I had a place lined up. Small, affordable mine. The holy trinity of post-breakup living. Harper was in the living room when I walked in, and she'd clearly spent her day spiraling because she had that manic energy that women get when they've been stress cleaning and overthinking simultaneously. "We need to talk," she said, which is universally recognized as the 4 worst words in the English language. "Sure, friend," I said, dropping my keys in the bowl by the door, a bowl she'd made in a pottery class she attended twice before deciding it wasn't her passion. "What's up?" "I've been thinking about logistics," she started, and I could tell she'd prepared talking points. Probably bullet points. Possibly a PowerPoint presentation if I gave her enough time. "And I think the best thing is for us to continue living here together until we figure things out. It doesn't make sense financially for either of us to move out right now, and we're adults. We can handle this maturely." I nodded along like I was actually considering this absolutely insane proposal. "That's a really interesting perspective, Harper. But here's the thing. I've already found a new place, and I'm moving out this weekend." Her face did this thing where it kind of froze, like her brain was buffering. "You what? You can't just move out on me." "As your friend," I said, and I'm not gonna lie, I was really starting to enjoy that phrase. I totally can. Friends don't share mortgages, Harper. Friends don't co-sign leases. Friends don't legally bind themselves to 3 decades of debt on a house that has character, but really just means the plumbing is from 1987 and the foundation is questionable. But what about the bills? What about the rent? What about? She was spiraling now, her voice getting higher with each question, and I could see the exact moment reality started setting in. The reality that this house, with its farmhouse aesthetic and Instagram-worthy kitchen that she never actually cooked in, ran on more than just good vibes and scented candles from Target. "What about them?" I asked, genuinely curious where she thought this was going. "Those are your responsibilities now." "Well, your half was always your responsibility, but I'm guessing you thought friendship meant I'd just keep covering everything while you figured out your authentic self, or whatever." The look on her face was absolutely priceless, and I'm talking the kind of priceless that art collectors would mortgage their souls for. It was confusion mixed with indignation, stirred together with a healthy dose of "this is not how I thought this would go." She legitimately looked like someone who'd just been told that Starbucks was permanently closing all locations, and she'd never again be able to order a Vinny iced caramel macchiato with extra caramel drizzle, oat milk, and 2 pumps of vanilla while taking a selfie with the cup. "You're being completely unreasonable," she finally managed to sputter out. "I thought you said we'd be friends." "We are friends," I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge, my beer that I'd bought, with my money, from my grocery run that I'd done by myself because Harper thought grocery shopping was boring. And friends respect each other's boundaries and independence. So I'm independently choosing to move out and respect your boundary of not wanting to be married to me anymore. See how that works? It's beautiful, really. Very mature of us. I cracked open the beer and walked past her toward my bedroom, soon to be my former bedroom. leaving her standing there with her mouth slightly open like a fish trying to understand algebra. "I'll start packing tonight," I called over my shoulder. "Don't worry, though. I'll leave you the good furniture. You know, as a friend." That night, I packed with the efficiency of a man who'd been given a get-out-of-jail-free card and wasn't about to waste it. Every item that went into a box felt like dropping an anchor I'd been carrying. Her problem now, her mortgage, her utilities, her character, housed with its quirky issues that would need someone handy to fix them. And as I taped up the last box and looked around the bedroom that hadn't felt like mine in years, I realized something. The silence, the peace, the complete and total lack of having to anticipate someone else's needs every second of every day. It felt better than any birthday present I could have asked for. Friends, I thought to myself, smiling. Yeah, we can definitely be friends. Just not the kind you were expecting. Harper. Harper tried the guilt routine on Wednesday, which was honestly impressive timing considering I'd only announced my departure 3 days ago, and she'd already cycled through denial, anger, and was now speedrunning her way through bargaining like it was an Olympic sport. I was in the garage, boxing up my tools, the good ones, the ones I'd collected over years of being the designated fix-it guy for literally everything in her life, when she appeared in the doorway looking like she'd just finished filming a sad montage for a rom-com. "Logan," she said, and her voice had that tremble in it that she used to use when she wanted me to cancel guys' night or agree to visit her parents for the 3rd weekend in a row. "We need to talk about what you're doing here." I looked up from the wrench set I was wrapping in newspaper. "I'm packing my tools." Pretty self-explanatory, really. This is the socket set. Those are the screwdrivers. And that beautiful bastard over there is my drill press that you said was too industrial for the garage, but I kept anyway because I'm not a quitter. "That's not what I mean," she said, stepping into the garage like she was entering a crime scene. "I mean emotionally. You're abandoning me emotionally. You said you'd always support me, that you'd always be there for me, and now you're just leaving?" And there it was, the emotional support card. The trump card she'd been holding on to, probably since the moment she realized that just friends didn't come with the same benefits package as legally bound husband. I had to give her credit. She'd really thought this through. Break up with the guy, keep all the perks, lose none of the responsibilities. It was a hell of a business model, just not one that was going to work on me anymore. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and gave her my biggest, brightest smile. The kind of smile that said, "I'm about to ruin your entire argument and enjoy every second of it." "Harper, I absolutely said I'd always support you emotionally. You're right about that. But here's the thing, and I really need you to hear me on this. That was as a husband. That was part of the marriage subscription plan. Premium tier. All access pass. But we're not married anymore, remember? You downgraded us to the basic friendship package, and that comes with significantly fewer features." Her face went through about 15 different expressions in 3 seconds, which was genuinely entertaining to watch. Confusion, indignation, more confusion, a flash of anger, back to confusion. "That's not. You can't just. Friendship isn't a subscription service, Logan." "Isn't it, though?" I asked, leaning against my workbench like I was about to deliver a lecture at a university for people who make terrible decisions. Think about it. Marriage is premium. You get emotional support, financial support, physical support, someone to listen to your work drama, even though you've told the same story about Karen from accounting like 40 times. Friends? Friends get the highlights reel. Friends get the "hey, how's it going" texts and maybe a beer every couple of months. Friends do not, and I cannot stress this enough, get unlimited access to my emotional labor. She just stared at me like I'd started speaking ancient Greek. "This is insane. You're being insane." Am I, though? Or am I just setting healthy boundaries in our new friendship? I went back to packing my tools, wrapping each one with the care of a man who knew he'd need them in his new, Harper-free life. See, when you're married, you sign up for the whole package. Good times, bad times. Hey, can you kill this spider? It's the size of a Buick times. But friends? Friends have limits. Friends have boundaries. Friends definitely don't provide 24/7 emotional support like some kind of therapeutic vending machine. I could see her brain trying to find a counterargument, watching the gears turn as she attempted to logic her way out of the corner she'd painted herself into. But I thought, I mean, you're a good person, Logan. Good people don't just abandon their friends when they need support. You're absolutely right, I said, turning to face her with a socket wrench still in my hand. I am a good person, which is why, as your friend, I'm going to be honest with you instead of pretending everything's fine. Here's your emotional support for the day. You're going to need to figure out how to handle your own problems now. You're going to need to learn how to fix things when they break, how to manage a household budget, how to deal with stress without having someone else absorb it all for you. That's not me being mean. That's me being a real friend and telling you the truth. She looked like she wanted to cry, and part of me, the part that had been married to her for 5 years, almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered every time she'd called me at work because she couldn't figure out how to reset the router. Every time she'd had a bad day and expected me to drop everything and provide immediate emotional tree-off. Every time she'd treated my time, my energy, and my emotional bandwidth like an unlimited resource that existed solely for her consumption. When are you moving out? She asked quietly, and I could tell she was trying a different approach. The defeated, sad approach. The one that was supposed to make me feel guilty and reconsider. Saturday morning, I replied, going back to my packing. Marcus is bringing his truck. Should be out of here by noon. This weekend? That's in 3 days. Yep. Turns out when you're not emotionally attached to a situation anymore, you can make decisions really quickly. It's super efficient. You should try it sometime. Thursday came and went in a blur of packing and fielding increasingly desperate texts from Harper. Each one was a variation on the same theme. Can we talk about this? Are you really doing this? This seems really sudden. I think you're making a mistake. I responded to exactly none of them, because friends don't owe each other immediate text responses. Friends can take their time. Friends can even leave messages on read if they're busy living their lives. Friday afternoon, I was loading boxes into my truck. Just a few things I wanted to take early, beat the rush, when Harper came outside with her phone in her hand, and that look on her face that said she'd just had what she thought was a brilliant idea. The washing machine is making that noise again, she announced, like this was breaking news that required immediate attention. I loaded another box into the truck bed. That sucks. Aren't you going to look at it? Nope. But you always fix the washing machine. I always fix the washing machine as your husband. I corrected, securing the box with a bungee cord. As your friend, I'm going to do what any good friend would do and send you helpful resources so you can learn to fix it yourself. I pulled out my phone and, right there in the driveway with her watching, I texted her a YouTube link. The video was titled, How to Troubleshoot Common Washing Machine Problems, Easy DIY Guide, with a cheerful thumbnail showing some random guy giving a thumbs up next to a washing machine. I added a message. This guy explains it really well. Super easy to follow. You got this, friend. Thumbs up. The look on her face when she heard her phone buzz and checked the message was worth every penny I'd spent on that washing machine repair 3 months ago. You've got to be kidding me. Not even a little bit, I said, loading another box. Friends send each other helpful tutorials. Friends empower each other to learn new skills. Friends don't enable learned helplessness by doing everything for each other. See, I'm being a great friend right now. She stood there in the driveway, phone in hand, looking like someone who'd just realized that the participation trophy she'd been counting on was actually made of cardboard and regret. I can't believe you're doing this. Believe it, I said, closing the truck bed and dusting off my hands. And hey, if you can't figure out the washing machine, there's always the laundromat on 5th Street. They're open till 9 on weekdays, 10 on weekends. Very reasonable prices. As your friend, I'm happy to provide recommendations. Saturday morning arrived with all the promise of a prison break, and I was up at dawn loading the rest of my stuff with the help of Marcus and his magnificent truck that could fit my entire life in 2 trips. Harper stayed in the bedroom with the door closed, which was probably for the best because I was in too good a mood to deal with any last-minute guilt trips or dramatic speeches. By 11:30, I was done. My keys, house keys, garage keys, the spare keys she'd insisted we make, just in case, were on the kitchen counter next to a note that said, "Thanks for everything. Good luck with the washing machine. Your friend, Logan." My half of the rent was officially canceled. The utilities that had been in my name were switched off, with notifications sent to the landlord that I was off the lease effective immediately. My phone bill, my car insurance, my gym membership, all the little threads that had been tangled up with hers were snipped clean. I stood in the driveway for a minute, looking at the house that had been my prison for the last 2 years, since we'd moved in and Harper had started treating me more like a maintenance crew than a partner. And I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts. Just pure, unadulterated relief. The kind of relief you feel when you finally set down something heavy you've been carrying for way too long. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You good, man?" "I'm better than good," I said, climbing into my truck. "I'm free." And as I drove away, with all my worldly possessions secured in the back and absolutely zero obligations waiting for me at my new place, the silence was so good it felt like therapy. The kind of therapy that doesn't cost $200 an hour and actually works. The kind that comes from knowing you don't owe anyone anything anymore except basic human decency. And even that's negotiable, depending on how they treat you. Harper wanted friendship. She got it. Just not the version she'd imagined. 3 days into my new life, I was living like a king. And by king, I mean I was eating cereal for dinner in my underwear, while watching whatever I wanted on TV, without someone sighing dramatically every 5 minutes because I wasn't emotionally present during her reality shows about people who flip houses, but mostly just argue with each other. My apartment was small, sure, but it was mine. No passive-aggressive notes about leaving dishes in the sink. No surprise visits from Harper's mom, who always looked at me like I was personally responsible for global warming. Just me, my cereal, and the beautiful sound of absolutely nothing demanding my attention. Then my phone rang. Harper's name lit up the screen like a warning signal, and I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I was feeling pretty good about my boundaries, and I figured this could be entertaining. "What's up, friend?" I answered, mid-bite of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. "Logan." Her voice came through the phone at a pitch that could probably shatter glass. "The rent's due." I swallowed my cereal, took a sip of milk straight from the bowl because I could do that now and nobody was around to judge me, and responded with the calmest voice I could muster. "Okay, so pay it." "What do you mean pay it?" "We always split the rent." "We did split the rent," I confirmed, setting down my bowl and settling deeper into my couch. My couch, from my apartment, in my space. Past tense. When we were married. But I moved out, remember? That whole thing where I packed all my stuff and left? That was me removing myself from the rent situation, both literally and financially. There was a silence on the other end that lasted so long, I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. She was just processing, which apparently took a while when reality didn't match up with the fantasy version of events she'd constructed in her head. "You can't just. I can't afford this place on my own, Logan." "As your friend," I said, and man, this phrase was really becoming my favorite thing in the English language. "I fully support your independence and your journey to financial self-sufficiency. You can do this. I believe in you." "This isn't funny." "I'm not laughing," I said, which was technically true even though I was absolutely grinning like an idiot. "I'm being completely serious. You wanted to end our marriage, which is fine. That's your choice. But marriages come with financial partnerships. Friendships don't. Friends don't co-sign on each other's rent. Friends don't cover each other's living expenses. Friends maybe split an appetizer at Applebee's if they're feeling generous. But this isn't fair. You're being completely unfair." And there it was. The fairness argument. The one that people always pull out when they realize that their actions have consequences and they don't like those consequences very much. I could have gone easy on her. I could have been the bigger person and helped her out, spotted her some cash, made this transition easier. But here's the thing about being the bigger person all the time. Eventually, your back hurts from carrying everyone else's weight. "Harper, let me explain something to you about fairness," I said, setting down my cereal bowl and standing up to pace around my tiny living room. Fairness was us being married and splitting responsibilities equally. Fairness was me working my ass off while also doing most of the household maintenance, the cooking, the shopping, and providing emotional support whenever you needed it. Fairness was me jumping through hoops to make you happy while you focused on finding yourself, or whatever that meant. You know what's not fair? Breaking up with someone and then expecting them to keep all the same responsibilities without any of the benefits. That's not fair. That's insane. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing, the little hiccups she got when she was really upset. Old Logan would have immediately backpedaled, apologized, figured out a way to fix this, and make her feel better. New Logan? New Logan stayed on his couch and finished his cereal. "You said you'd always be there for me," she sobbed. playing the greatest hits album of our relationship. I said a lot of things when I thought we were building a life together, I replied. But you decided you wanted something different. So now we're friends, and friends have boundaries. Friends have their own apartments, and their own rent, and their own responsibilities. Welcome to friendship, Harper. It's a lot less convenient than marriage. But hey, you're finding yourself, right? This is all part of the journey. She hung up on me. Just straight up disconnected the call, which was probably the smartest thing she'd done in weeks because I was just getting warmed up. I looked at my phone, shrugged, and went back to my cereal. It had gotten a little soggy, but honestly, even soggy cereal in my own apartment beat the hell out of five-star dining in that house with Harper. About an hour later, my phone rang again. Different number this time. I answered it without checking the caller ID because I'm an optimist and occasionally an idiot. Logan, this is Patricia. Harper's mom. Of course it was Harper's mom. We need to talk about what you're doing to my daughter. I closed my eyes and counted to 3, which is what my therapist recommended I do before responding to situations that might make me want to drive my truck into a lake. Hi, Patricia. What can I do for you? You can stop abandoning Harper like this. She's devastated, Logan. She called me crying about the rent, and I can't believe you're being so cruel about this whole situation. Cruel, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air for a second. Patricia, with all due respect, and I mean that as genuinely as I can while talking to someone who's calling to yell at me about a situation they don't fully understand. Harper broke up with me. She ended our marriage. She wanted to be friends. I'm respecting her decision and adjusting our relationship accordingly. But you can't just leave her high and dry like this. Ma'am, I said, and I was using my customer service voice now, the one I used when dealing with particularly difficult clients at work. I'm not leaving her high and dry. I'm leaving her to manage her own adult responsibilities like an adult. She has a job. She has income. She has the same capabilities as any other functioning adult to figure out how to pay her bills. What she doesn't have anymore is a husband who will subsidize her lifestyle while she figures out what she wants to do with her life. That's not how family works. You're absolutely right. I agreed. That's not how family works. But we're not family anymore. Harper made that very clear when she broke up with me. We're friends now. And friends. You can't abandon her like this. Patricia was in full mama bear mode now, which I understood on some level. Nobody wants to see their kid struggling. But Harper wasn't a kid. She was a 30-year-old woman who'd made a choice without thinking through the practical implications. And now she was facing those implications head-on. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, and I was starting to lose patience now. I'm setting boundaries. Harper decided she didn't want to be married anymore, which is fine. That's her choice to make. But she doesn't get to keep all the benefits of being married while I get none of them. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. You're being selfish. No, Patricia, I'm being fair. Harper wanted independence, and I'm giving her independence. She wanted to find herself, and I'm giving her the space to do that. What I'm not doing is continuing to play the role of provider, protector, and personal assistant while she treats me like a convenient accessory she can keep around for when things get hard. But she needs you. She needed a husband. I corrected. She has a friend. And friends, Patricia, support each other emotionally, but not financially. Friends encourage each other to grow and learn and become self-sufficient. So that's what I'm doing. I'm being the best friend I can be by letting Harper figure this out on her own. There was a long pause, and then Patricia said something I wasn't expecting. You're not the man I thought you were. You're right, I said. I'm not. The man you thought I was would have rolled over and accepted whatever scraps of affection and respect Harper was willing to throw my way while continuing to support her in every possible sense. But that man was miserable, Patricia. That man was dying a slow death of resentment and unappreciated effort. This man is actually happy for the first time in years. She hung up on me too. Apparently, it was genetic. I sat there on my couch, in my quiet apartment, with my soggy cereal and my clear conscience, and I realized something. Every phone call, every guilt trip, every attempt to make me feel bad about setting boundaries just confirmed that I'd made the right decision. These people didn't miss me. They missed what I provided. They missed the convenience of having someone around who would solve all their problems without complaint. My phone buzzed with a text from Harper. I can't believe you talk to my mother like that. You're being incredibly childish. I typed back. Friends sometimes disagree with their friends' parents. It happens. Good luck with the rent situation. Maybe check Craigslist for a roommate. I hear there are lots of options. She didn't respond, which meant she was either too angry to form words or she was finally starting to understand that the gravy train had left the station and I wasn't selling tickets anymore. I finished my cereal, rinsed out the bowl, and looked around my apartment. It wasn't much. The walls were still bare. I was using a folding chair as a nightstand, and my bed was basically just a mattress on the floor until I could afford a proper frame. But it was mine. Every single square foot of it was mine, earned with my money, maintained by my effort, and completely free of people who only valued me for what I could do for them. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Harper. Fine. Be that way. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. I laughed out loud, actually laughed, because the level of delusion required to send that text was honestly impressive. I typed back. I already know what I lost. A mortgage I couldn't afford, a partner who didn't appreciate me, and a mother-in-law who thought I was an ATM with feelings. I'm devastated. Truly. Then I blocked her number for the rest of the day, made myself a sandwich, and watched 3 episodes of a show about people who live in tiny houses. Life was good. Life was quiet. Life was finally, beautifully mine. A week into my glorious new existence, I'd established a pretty solid routine. Wake up whenever I wanted, make coffee without having to steam some fancy milk substitute, go to work, come home, and do absolutely nothing for nobody. It was therapeutic in a way that no amount of couples counseling had ever been. Turns out the best way to fix a broken relationship is to not be in it anymore. Revolutionary concept, I know. Then the calls started. Not just calls, a full-blown campaign of emergencies that all somehow required my immediate attention despite the fact that I no longer lived there and had exactly zero obligation to help. It was like Harper had compiled a list of every possible household disaster and was working through them alphabetically, hoping that eventually something would crack my resolve and I'd come running back like a well-trained golden retriever. Monday morning, 7:30 a.m., my phone lit up. Harper's name flashing across the screen like a warning siren. I was brushing my teeth at the time, standing in my tiny bathroom that didn't have heated floors or a rainfall showerhead or any of the fancy crap Harper had insisted we needed in our house. Just a regular bathroom with regular water pressure, and honestly, it was perfect. I spit out my toothpaste and answered. Yeah. Logan. Oh my God. Thank God you answered. Her voice was at that pitch that suggested either someone was dying or she'd seen a spider. Based on our history, it was probably the spider. The power's out. Like, completely out. I don't know what to do. I rinsed my mouth, dried my face, and walked back into my bedroom to finish getting dressed. Have you checked the breaker box? The what? The breaker box. It's in the garage, gray metal box on the wall, probably has a bunch of switches in it. Sometimes they trip and you just need to flip them back. There was a pause. I don't know what that is. Harper, we've lived in that house for 2 years. I've shown you the breaker box at least 4 times. This was actually true. I'd given her a full house tutorial when we moved in, shown her where everything was, how everything worked, specifically so we wouldn't have moments like this. She'd been on her phone the entire time, probably scrolling through Instagram or texting her friends about how adulting is so hard. Well, I don't remember. Can you just come over and fix it? I pulled a shirt over my head and checked myself in the mirror. Looking good, feeling better. Nope. What do you mean, nope? I mean, no, I cannot come over and fix it. I have a job I need to get to, and also, we're not married anymore, remember? Friends don't typically handle each other's electrical issues. But I need help. And as your friend, I'm helping you by empowering you to solve this yourself. Go to the garage, find the gray box, look for any switches that are pointing the opposite direction from the others, flip them back. Boom. Power restored. You can do this. This is ridiculous. You're being ridiculous. I'm being a great friend, actually. I'm teaching you valuable life skills. You should thank me. I grabbed my keys and wallet. Good luck with the breaker box. I hung up before she could respond, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt like a superhero. Not the kind that saves people from burning buildings, but the kind that saves himself from being used as free labor. That's a different kind of heroism, but it counts. Wednesday afternoon, I was at work, elbow deep in an engine repair, when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. I ignored it the first time, and the second time. By the third time, my coworker Jake looked over and said, "You gonna get that, man?" Sounds urgent. I wiped my hands on a rag and checked my phone. 6 missed calls from Harper. 6. I called her back, already knowing this was going to be good. Finally, she practically screamed into the phone. I've been calling you for 20 minutes. I was working. You know, that thing people do to earn money to pay their bills. What's the emergency? The car won't start. I turn the key and it just makes this clicking noise and nothing happens. I walked over to the break room for some privacy, mainly because I knew I was about to say something that would make me laugh and I didn't need my coworkers thinking I was losing it. Okay, so what do you want me to do about it? Come fix it. You always know what to do with car stuff. Harper, I'm at work. I'm literally at my job, fixing other people's cars, for money. I can't just leave to come fix yours. But I need my car. I have to get to work. As your friend, I said, cracking open a soda from the vending machine, I'd recommend calling AAA, or a tow truck, or using one of those rideshare apps that everyone else in America uses when their car doesn't work. Uber, Lyft, public transportation. The options are endless, really. I don't have AAA. Well, that sounds like a you problem. Probably should have thought about that before you broke up with the guy who had AAA and would have helped you with stuff like this. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Immensely, I admitted, because why lie? Look, I gotta get back to work. But here's a pro tip. If the car's making a clicking noise, it's probably the battery. You can call any mechanic shop and they'll come jump it for you. Or you can ask one of your neighbors. That's what friends do, right? Help each other out. She hung up on me. I was starting to collect hang-ups like Pokemon cards. Gotta catch 'em all. Thursday evening, I was cooking dinner. Actual dinner, with vegetables and everything. Because it turns out cooking for yourself is way more enjoyable when nobody's critiquing your seasoning choices. When my phone rang again, I almost didn't answer, but curiosity is my weakness. What now? The internet's not working. Harper sounded defeated, like she'd been fighting a war and losing badly. Have you tried turning the router off and on again? Yes, I've tried everything. Have you called the internet company? They said it would be a 45-minute wait time. So wait 45 minutes. That's literally their job. They get paid to help you with this stuff. But you could just come over and... No, you didn't even let me finish. Didn't need to. The answer is no. Harper, I need you to understand something, and I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. I am not your personal IT guy. I'm not your handyman. I'm not your emergency contact for every minor inconvenience that happens in your life. We're friends now, and friends don't provide 24/7 technical support. Friends help each other. You're right, friends do help each other. But there's a difference between helping and being taken advantage of. When we were married, I helped you with everything because that's what partners do. But you didn't want a partner anymore. You wanted to be friends. So now you get friend-level help, which is me telling you to call the professionals who are actually paid to deal with this stuff. Silence on the other end. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what argument to use next. I miss you, she finally said, and her voice was soft, vulnerable, the way it used to sound when we first started dating and everything was still good between us. No, you don't, I said, not unkindly. You miss having someone around to fix all your problems. There's a difference. That's not fair. Life's not fair, Harper. But here's what is fair. You made a choice, and choices have consequences. You wanted independence, and independence means figuring stuff out on your own sometimes. It means sitting on hold with the internet company for 45 minutes. It means learning how to check a breaker box, or jump a car battery, or, I don't know, using Google like the rest of humanity when you don't know how to do something. I heard her sniffle, and part of me, the part that had loved her once upon a time, felt a little bad. But the bigger part of me, the part that had spent years being underappreciated and taken for granted, stood firm. I have to go, she said quietly. My 45 minutes is probably almost up. Good luck with the internet, I said, and I meant it. Not in a sarcastic way, but in a genuine, I hope you figure this out because you're an adult human who should be capable of handling basic household issues kind of way. Friday was blissfully quiet. No calls, no texts, no emergencies. I went to work, came home, ordered pizza, and watched a movie without anyone asking me to pause it every 5 minutes to explain the plot or discuss the deeper meaning of the protagonist's character arc. It was peaceful in a way that I'd forgotten was possible. Saturday morning, I was sleeping in. Actually sleeping in, past 9 a.m., like a decadent lazy person who had no obligations and no one to answer to. when my phone buzzed with a text. I grabbed it, still half asleep, and saw Harper's name. The message read, "Washing machine is flooding. Water everywhere. Help." I looked at the message, looked at my ceiling, looked back at the message. Then I typed out my response with the careful precision of a man who had finally learned where his boundaries were and how to defend them. YouTube, how to turn off water supply to washing machine. It's the valve behind the machine. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You got this, champ. Thumbs up. Then I turned my phone on silent, rolled over, and went back to sleep. Because friends help friends learn how to help themselves, and I was being the best friend I could possibly be by letting Harper figure out that adulting is hard, but it's a lot harder when you push away the person who was making it easier. When I woke up later, there was a long paragraph text from Harper about how I was the worst person she'd ever met, and how she couldn't believe she'd wasted 5 years on me. I read it, shrugged, and sent back a single emoji, the shrugging guy. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't the bad guy in this story. I was just a guy who'd finally learned that setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, it makes you sane. And sanity, it turns out, is way more valuable than being someone's on-call handyman for the rest of your life. 2 weeks into my new life, I was starting to feel like an actual human being again instead of a multi-tool with anxiety. My apartment was still pretty bare bones. I'd managed to acquire an actual bed frame from Facebook Marketplace and a couch that only had one questionable stain that I covered with a throw blanket. But it was mine, and that made it better than any McMansion Harper could have dreamed up. I was coming home from work on a Tuesday evening, covered in grease and smelling like motor oil and poor life choices, when I noticed someone sitting on the steps of the building next to mine. Our apartment complex was one of those places where the buildings were close enough that you could technically have a conversation with your neighbor without raising your voice, but far enough apart that you could pretend you didn't hear them if you wanted to avoid human interaction. The woman on the steps had dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, the kind that looked accidental but probably took 15 minutes to achieve, and she was drinking tea from one of those massive mugs that could double as a weapon. She looked up as I walked past, and our eyes met for a second before I did that awkward neighbor thing where you smile, but not too much because you don't want to seem like a serial killer. "Rough day," she called out, and her voice had this amused tone to it that made me stop walking. I looked down at myself. Grease-stained work shirt, jeans that had seen better days, hands that probably needed a wire brush to get clean. Is it that obvious? You look like you either wrestled a car engine or lost a fight with a very aggressive mechanical bull. She took a sip of her tea, and I noticed she was trying not to smile. "I'm going with car engine based on the smell." "Mechanic," I confirmed, walking a little closer but maintaining a respectful distance because strange woman, evening time, don't be creepy. "Logan, I live in 4B. "Lila," she said, and she did smile then, full-on grinned like I'd said something funny. "4A, right next door? I've seen you moving in over the past couple weeks. You're the guy with the excellent taste in furniture that includes camping chairs and a mini fridge." I laughed despite myself. "Hey, that mini fridge is a classic. Bought it in college, still runs like a champion. That's quality craftsmanship right there." "Nothing says I've got my life together like a dorm room refrigerator," she agreed, and there was zero judgment in her voice, just good-natured teasing. "Want some tea? I made way too much, and I'm trying to avoid going back inside where my laptop is waiting to remind me that I have deadlines." I should have said no. I should have been a normal person and gone inside, showered, and continued my hermit lifestyle. But there was something about the way she asked, casual, friendly, like she actually wanted company instead of feeling obligated to offer, that made me say, "Yeah, actually, that sounds good. Let me just wash my hands so I don't contaminate your mug with whatever industrial fluids I'm currently covered in." 5 minutes later, I was back outside, hands scrubbed mostly clean, sitting on the steps next to Lila with a mug of tea that tasted like honey and something herbal I couldn't identify. It was weird, sitting there with a complete stranger, but also kind of nice. No pressure, no expectations, just two people drinking tea and watching the sun set behind the complex's very mediocre landscaping. "So," Lila said after a comfortable silence, "I have to ask, and feel free to tell me to mind my own business, but did you just go through a breakup? Because I've been watching you move in, and there's been a definite lack of feminine products in your box collection. Just lots of tools, car parts, and what looked like a concerning amount of cereal boxes." I nearly spit out my tea. That obvious, huh? The camping chair was my first clue. The fact that you're using a toolbox as a coffee table was the second. But really, it was the smile. She turned to look at me, her expression curious but kind. You've been smiling every time you come home. Like, genuinely smiling. People who just got out of good relationships don't smile like that. Divorced? I said, deciding that honesty was probably easier than dancing around it. Well, separated. Paperwork's in progress. Wife decided she wanted to find herself, and that apparently required not being married to me anymore. Ouch. Nah, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. It's actually been great. Turns out being single is way better than being married to someone who treats you like a combination ATM, handyman, and emotional support animal. Lila laughed, and it was one of those real laughs that made her whole face light up. Okay, that's the most honest post-breakup assessment I've ever heard. Most people do the whole "it was mutual" or "we grew apart" thing. You went straight to "she used me for money and repairs." Because that's what happened, I said, shrugging. She broke up with me on my birthday, told me we could still be friends, and then was genuinely shocked when I treated her like an actual friend instead of a wife with no benefits. Moved out a week later, and she's been having a full-scale meltdown ever since because turns out she can't figure out how to check a breaker box without me. On your birthday? Lila's eyes widened. That's cold. Like ice cold. That's villain origin story cold. Right? I had cake and everything. Candles were still burning when she launched into her breakup speech. She'd rehearsed it too. It was like watching a TED Talk about why I wasn't good enough anymore. Lila shook her head, still grinning. You know what? You handled that like a pro. Most guys would have either lost their minds or turned into a doormat. You went full-on malicious compliance. That's impressive. Malicious compliance. I repeated, testing the phrase. I like that. That's exactly what it is. She wanted friendship, so I gave her friendship. Just not the version she imagined in her head, where I continued to do everything I did before, but without any of the relationship stuff. Let me guess, Lila said, leaning back on her elbows and looking way too comfortable for someone sitting on concrete steps. She keeps calling you with emergencies that aren't actually emergencies? Every single day. I counted on my fingers. Power's out, car won't start, internet's down, washing machine's flooding. I've become a human Google search, except instead of solutions, I just send her YouTube links and tell her to figure it out. That's beautiful, Lila said, and she sounded like she genuinely meant it. That's the kind of petty revenge that doesn't actually hurt anyone, but teaches a valuable lesson. You're like a Zen master of boundaries. Zen master of boundaries, I laughed. That's going on my business cards. Right under recovering husband. How long were you married? 5 years. Together for 7. And honestly, the first 2 years were great. Then we bought the house, and she started treating me more like staff than a partner. Every conversation became a task list. Every day off became a list of projects she needed me to complete. I don't think she said thank you in the last year of our marriage. Lila made a face like she'd tasted something sour. That's depressing. It was, I agreed. But this? I gestured around at the mediocre apartment complex with its flickering parking lot lights and slightly overgrown grass. This is actually pretty great. Nobody's asking me to fix anything. Nobody's mad at me for not reading their mind. Nobody's disappointed that I'm not living up to some impossible standard they set without telling me. To freedom, Lila said, raising her mug. To freedom, I echoed, clinking my mug against hers. And to neighbors who don't judge you for having camping chairs. Oh, I'm definitely judging you for the camping chairs, she said, grinning. But in like an affectionate way. They show character. Poor judgment, but character. We sat there for another hour, talking about nothing important and everything at once. She told me she was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home and was currently procrastinating on a logo design for a company that sold organic dog food. I told her about my job at the shop, about Marcus and the guys I worked with, about how nice it was to come home to silence instead of a list of things I'd done wrong that day. You know what I noticed? Lila said as the sky turned from orange to purple. You haven't checked your phone once since you sat down. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked at the screen. 7 missed calls from Harper, 12 texts, and what looked like the beginning of an email. Huh, I didn't even feel it vibrate. You gonna check those? Nope, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. It's probably just another emergency that isn't actually an emergency. She'll figure it out. Or she won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. I like you, Lila said decisively. You're funny, you're self-aware, and you don't seem like an axe murderer. That's like top 3 qualities in a neighbor. I like you too, I said, and I meant it. You make good tea, you don't ask intrusive questions disguised as concern, and you appreciate the aesthetic value of camping furniture. Also top 3 neighbor qualities. We should do this again, she said, standing up and stretching. The tea thing, I mean. Not the you covered in grease thing. Although I won't judge if that's your signature look. The tea thing sounds great, I agreed, standing up and handing her back the mug. Fair warning though, my ex lives like 20 minutes from here, and she's currently in the trying to guilt me into coming back phase of grief. So if you see a crazy woman banging on my door at weird hours, that's probably her. Noted, Lila said. If I see a crazy woman, I'll pretend I don't hear anything and maybe turn my music up. Plausible deniability. You really are the perfect neighbor. She laughed, and I headed back to my apartment feeling lighter than I had in months. It was weird how a simple conversation with a stranger could remind you that there were still good people in the world. People who didn't want anything from you except maybe some company and conversation. People who laughed at your jokes instead of sighing like you'd personally disappointed them. As I unlocked my door and stepped into my sparse but peaceful apartment, I realized something. This was the first time since the divorce that I'd thought about the future with something resembling optimism. Not because I was planning some grand revenge or waiting for Harper to realize what she'd lost, but because I'd just spent an hour with someone who treated me like an actual person instead of a problem to be fixed or a resource to be exploited. My phone buzzed with another text from Harper. I glanced at it. We need to talk. This is important. I typed back. Busy. Try Google. And then I turned off my phone completely, made myself a sandwich, and went to bed feeling like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. 3 weeks after the Great Tea Summit with Lila, my life had developed a routine that didn't suck, which was honestly a huge upgrade from my previous existence. Work, home, occasional tea sessions with Lila that had evolved into full-on hangouts, and absolutely zero emergency calls from Harper because I'd started letting them all go to voicemail. It was peaceful. It was calm. It was everything I'd been missing during 5 years of marriage to a woman who thought self-care meant making everyone else's life harder. Meanwhile, Harper was apparently having what I can only describe as a complete infrastructure collapse. I know this because Marcus, my buddy from work who still lived in the old neighborhood, had been giving me updates that I didn't ask for, but secretly enjoyed. Dude, Marcus said one day during lunch break, biting into a sandwich the size of a small child. Your ex put up an ad looking for a roommate. Have you seen this thing? It's insane. He pulled out his phone and showed me the posting. I started reading and immediately began choking on my own sandwich. Roommate wanted. The ad screamed in all caps, because apparently Harper had discovered the internet equivalent of yelling. Must be financially stable, handy with repairs, good with technology, emotionally mature, quiet, clean, and willing to help with household tasks. Must have own transportation and be available for occasional emergency situations. Prefer someone calm under pressure who can handle home maintenance issues. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. This isn't a roommate ad, I said, showing it to Jake who'd walked over to see what we were laughing about. This is a job posting. She's literally trying to hire another me. Available for occasional emergency situations, Jake read out loud, barely containing his laughter. What kind of emergencies? Like, the Wi-Fi is down and I don't know how to restart a router emergencies? Exactly those emergencies, I confirmed. She's looking for someone who will basically be her husband without any of the husband benefits. Good luck with that, Harper. Marcus nearly spit out his soda. How much is she offering to pay this person? Let's see. I scrolled down. Split rent, split utilities. So she wants someone to pay half the rent and be her personal handyman, tech support, and emotional stability coordinator. That's not a roommate. That's a sucker. How many responses has she gotten? Jake asked. I checked the ad. Posted 3 days ago. 0 responses. None. Absolutely none. Turns out people can spot a bad deal when they see one. The 3 of us stood there in the break room, looking at this sad, desperate ad, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but just nothing. No anger, no bitterness, no desire to gloat. Just a kind of distant pity for someone who'd thrown away something good because she thought she could do better and was now discovering that better didn't exist. "You good, man?" Marcus asked, probably noticing that I'd gone quiet. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm actually great. I just realized that I don't care anymore. Like, at all. She can figure it out or not figure it out. Either way, it's not my circus and definitely not my monkeys." That evening, I was helping Lila fix a loose board on her garden gate. She had a tiny patio area that she'd turned into an actual garden with plants and everything, which was impressive considering our apartment complex's strict, no modifications policy that everyone ignored when she asked me about Harper. "So your ex," Lila said, holding the gate steady while I tightened the screws. "Is she still calling you with emergencies?" "Not as much," I said, focused on getting the screw at the right angle. "I think she's finally starting to get the message. Either that or she's found someone else to bother." "Marcus showed me that roommate ad," Lila admitted, and when I looked up, she was trying not to smile. That was something. Must be emotionally mature and good with home repairs. She basically described a therapist who moonlights as a contractor. She described a husband. I corrected, moving to the next screw. She just doesn't want to admit it. She wants all the benefits of being married without any of the commitment or emotional labor on her end. "That's not how any of this works," Lila said, which was basically the thesis statement of my entire divorce. "Nope, but she's gonna learn that the hard way." I tightened the last screw and tested the gate. "Solid. No more wobbling." "There you go. Good as new." "You're really good at this," Lila observed, inspecting my work. "The fixing things thing. Do you actually enjoy it, or did you just get good at it because you had to?" It was a good question, and I had to think about it for a second. Both, I guess. I like working with my hands, solving problems, making things work better. What I didn't like was being expected to fix everything all the time without any appreciation or even a basic thank you. It stopped being satisfying and started being just exhausting. "That makes sense," Lila said, and we walked back to her patio where she'd set up 2 chairs and made lemonade because apparently she was the kind of person who just made lemonade on random weeknights like it was a normal thing to do. "You know what the difference is between you helping me with my gate and you helping Harper with whatever crisis she was having?" "What?" I asked, and I said thank you. "And I'm making you lemonade because I appreciate it." She handed me a glass. "It's not that complicated. People just forget that appreciation is part of the deal." I took a sip of the lemonade. It was perfect. Not too sweet, not too tart, just right. "This is really good. See? Appreciation. It's a revolutionary concept." She settled into her chair, looking way too pleased with herself. "Also, I made cookies earlier. They're inside if you want some." "You made cookies?" Procrastination baking. I had a deadline, so naturally I decided to make snickerdoodles instead of working. It's a disease, really. I laughed, and it struck me how easy this was. Sitting on a patio, drinking lemonade, talking about nothing important with someone who didn't need anything from me except maybe some company and conversation. When was the last time I'd felt this relaxed around another person? Probably college, before adult responsibilities and bad marriages had turned life into a series of obligations and disappointments. "You're doing it again," Lila said, watching me with those observant eyes that noticed way too much. "Doing what?" "Smiling like you just won the lottery. You do that a lot lately." "That's because I kind of did win the lottery," I said. "The divorce lottery. The getting out before it got worse lottery. The finding out that life is actually pretty good when you're not in a toxic relationship lottery. Those are all the same lottery," she pointed out. "Yeah, but I'm really, really grateful for it, so I'm counting it multiple times." We sat there as the sun went down, and she told me about the dog food logo she was still procrastinating on, and I told her about this classic Mustang that had come into the shop that was basically automotive art. Normal conversation. Easy conversation. The kind where you don't have to watch what you say or worry about accidentally triggering some emotional landmine you didn't know existed. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said after a while. "Sure. Do you ever miss it?" Not her, specifically, but like being with someone. I thought about it, really thought about it. I missed the idea of what I thought I had. The partnership, the companionship, the having someone to share stuff with. But the actual reality of what I had. No. I don't miss being taken for granted. I don't miss feeling like an employee in my own marriage. I don't miss the constant criticism disguised as helpful feedback. That's fair, Lila said. I just wanted to make sure you weren't one of those guys who swears off relationships forever and becomes weird and bitter about it. Nah, I said. I'm not swearing off relationships. I'm just way more selective now about who I spend my time and energy on. Life's too short to waste it on people who don't appreciate you. Words to live by, she agreed, raising her lemonade glass. To not wasting time on people who suck. To not wasting time on people who suck. I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Harper's name. The text read, I saw you posted something on Facebook about fixing a gate. Are you dating someone? I stared at the message for a second, trying to figure out when I'd supposedly posted anything on Facebook, which I barely used. Then I realized, Marcus. Marcus must have posted something about me helping Lila. Or maybe Jake had. Or hell, maybe Lila had posted a picture of her fixed gate and thanked me in the comments. Didn't really matter. I typed back, not dating, just helping a friend. You know, like friends do. Then I added, also, friends don't monitor each other's social media. Might want to work on that. Lila noticed me texting and raised an eyebrow. The ex. Yep. Apparently she's stalking my social media now. Wants to know if I'm dating someone. Are you? Lila asked, and there was something in her voice that I couldn't quite read. Not at the moment, I said honestly, but I'm not opposed to it. If the right person came along, someone who actually appreciates me and doesn't treat me like a combination ATM and maintenance crew. Someone who makes you lemonade and cookies? Lila suggested, smiling. That would definitely be a point in their favor. I agreed, smiling back. My phone buzzed again. Harper, this is really hurtful, Logan. I can't believe you're moving on already. I showed the text to Lila, who read it and made a face like she'd smelled something bad. She broke up with you, and now she's mad that you're living your life? That's Olympic-level audacity. Right. I typed back to Harper. You broke up with me, remember? On my birthday? With cake. You don't get to be upset about what I do with my life now. We're friends, remember? Friends are happy for each other. I put my phone on silent and shoved it back in my pocket. You know what? I'm done engaging with this. She can be mad all she wants. I've got lemonade to drink, and allegedly there are cookies somewhere. There are definitely cookies, Lila confirmed, standing up. Come on, let's get them before I eat them all myself. As I followed her inside, past the patio she'd turned into a little garden paradise, into her apartment that was cozy and lived in and felt like an actual home instead of a showroom, I realized something. This was what I'd been missing. Not romance necessarily, but genuine human connection. Someone who treated me like a person instead of a resource. Someone who said thank you and made lemonade and baked cookies not because they wanted something, but because they enjoyed my company. And if Harper couldn't understand why that was infinitely better than what we'd had, well, that was her problem to figure out. I had cookies to eat. A month into my new life, things with Lila had evolved from friendly neighbors who occasionally drink tea to people who hang out multiple times a week and actually enjoy each other's company. We'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm where I'd help her with random household stuff. Not because she couldn't do it herself, but because she actually asked nicely and said thank you like a normal human being. And she'd feed me because apparently I'd been living on a diet of cereal and takeout, and she found this personally offensive. It was a Tuesday evening, and we were at her place having dinner. Actual dinner. She'd made this pasta thing with vegetables and chicken that tasted like someone had actually put effort and seasoning into it, which was a novel experience after years of Harper's cooking that mostly consisted of ordering Uber Eats and transferring it to our nice plates so it looked homemade. We were mid-conversation about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. It absolutely is, fight me, when my phone rang. Harper's name lit up the screen like a warning beacon. I'd unblocked her number a few days ago in a moment of weakness, thinking maybe she'd finally moved on. That was clearly a mistake. I declined the call and went back to my pasta. Sorry, where were we? Right? Bruce Willis and the true meaning of Christmas. Lila was looking at me with this amused expression. You gonna get that? Nope. If it's important, she'll leave a voicemail. And if it's not important, she'll call back 17 times until I answer, at which point I'll know it's definitely not important. My phone immediately started ringing again. I declined it again. See? Not important. You're ice cold, Lila said, but she was grinning. I respect it. The phone rang a third time. I sighed, put down my fork, and answered, "What's up, Harper? Where are you?" Her voice had that edge to it, the one she used when she was working herself up into a full dramatic production. "Having dinner." "What? With who?" "A friend." Again, why? There was a pause, and I could practically hear her brain processing this information and coming to all the wrong conclusions, which were probably actually the right conclusions, but she didn't need to know that yet. "Are you with Lila?" "How do you even know her name?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I have my sources." "Are you dating her?" I looked across the table at Lila, who was watching this conversation unfold with barely contained amusement. "Harper, even if I was dating someone, which is none of your business since you broke up with me, I wouldn't need to report it to you. We're friends, remember? Friends don't owe each other detailed relationship updates. I just think it's really suspicious that you've moved on so quickly," she said, and her voice had shifted to that wounded tone that used to make me feel guilty, but now just made me tired. "We were together for 7 years, Logan. 7 years. And you're already having cozy dinners with your neighbor?" "Harper," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "you broke up with me. On my birthday. You told me you wanted to find yourself, and that we should be friends. So I'm being your friend. Friends are happy when their friends are happy. Friends don't interrogate each other about who they have dinner with. This is different, and you know it." "How is it different?" "Because," she stopped, clearly realizing that she'd backed herself into a logical corner. "It just is. I can't believe you do this to me." "Do what to you exactly?" "Exist? Have friends? Eat pasta." I was getting frustrated now, and Lila must have noticed because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand supportively. "Harper, I'm going to say this one more time as clearly as I can. What I do with my life is no longer your concern. You gave up the right to have opinions about my personal life when you decided you didn't want to be married to me anymore. But I saw you with her." Harper's voice was rising now, getting shrill. "I drove by your apartment complex yesterday, and I saw you two on her patio, laughing and looking all cozy." "Okay, that was creepy. That was legitimately stalker-level behavior. You drove to my apartment?" "Harper, that's not normal. That's not something friends do. That's something people do right before they get a restraining order filed against them. I wasn't stalking you. I was in the area. My apartment is 30 minutes from where you live. You weren't in the area. You specifically drove there to spy on me. That's stalking, Harper. That's the literal definition of stalking." Silence on the other end. "Then, so you were dating her." "Even if I was, and I'm not confirming or denying anything because, again, none of your business. You have zero right to be upset about it. You left me. You ended our marriage. You told me we'd be better as friends. Friends don't get jealous when their friends date other people. We only broke up a month ago. You broke up with me a month ago." I corrected. "I'm guessing you'd been mentally checked out of this relationship for way longer than that. So don't act like I'm the bad guy here for moving on with my life." I heard her sniffle, and despite everything, despite all the frustration and anger and exhaustion, I felt a tiny pang of something that might have been sympathy. But then I remembered every emergency call, every guilt trip, every expectation that I'd continue to be her personal assistant without any of the benefits of being her partner, and that sympathy evaporated like water on hot asphalt. "I have to go," I said. "My pasta's getting cold. Have a good night, Harper." I hung up before she could respond and looked at Lila, who was trying very hard not to laugh. "I'm sorry," I said. "That was incredibly awkward, and you shouldn't have had to witness it." "Are you kidding? That was amazing," Lila said, letting the laughter out. "You handled that perfectly. Firm boundaries, no wavering. And you called her out on the stalking thing, which was honestly pretty creepy." "She drove by my apartment to spy on me," I said, still processing that particular detail. "That's insane, right? That's objectively insane behavior." "Completely insane," Lila confirmed. "Also, for the record, your pasta is not getting cold because I put it in the microwave when you were on the phone. I'm very considerate like that." "You're the best," I said, and I meant it. "So," Lila said, bringing my reheated pasta back to the table, "are we dating?" I nearly choked on the water I just sipped. Are we?" "I don't know," she said, sitting back down with this mischievous smile. "You were very careful not to confirm or deny it to your ex. I'm curious what the actual answer is." "I mean," I said, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation without making a complete idiot of myself, "I like you. A lot. I like spending time with you. I like that you make me lemonade and feed me actual food and don't treat me like a combination ATM and repair service. But I also don't want to rush into anything or make you uncomfortable or— Logan, she interrupted, still smiling. I like you too. I have liked you since the tea thing. I was just waiting for you to figure out that moving on from your ex didn't make you a bad person. Oh, I said, feeling my face heat up like a teenager. That's good to know. So, she said, taking a bite of her pasta. Do you want to be dating? Like, officially? Or do you need more time? I thought about it for exactly half a second. Yes, I would like that. To be dating. Officially. Cool, Lila said, like we'd just decided what movie to watch instead of making an actual relationship decision. Now can we please finish this conversation about Die Hard? Because I have strong opinions, and you're wrong. We spent the rest of the evening debating Christmas movies, and at some point, I ended up on her couch with her leaning against me, and it felt so natural and easy and right that I couldn't believe I'd spent 5 years in a marriage where everything felt like work. My phone buzzed around 10 p.m. A text from Harper. I just saw you with Lila. Are you two really together? Wait, what? I looked at Lila, who checked her own phone and made a face. She's outside. She's literally parked outside right now watching your apartment. I got up and looked out the window. Sure enough, there was Harper's car parked across the street, and I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat. This is actually unhinged, I said. This is restraining order territory. Want me to call the cops? Lila asked, and she sounded like she was actually considering it. No, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm going to handle this once and for all. I walked outside, and Lila followed me despite my protests that she didn't need to be part of this drama. Harper saw us coming and got out of her car, and her face was blotchy from crying and her yoga pants had a stain on them, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Logan, she said, and her voice cracked. Please, can we just talk? Harper, you need to go home, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. You can't keep showing up at my apartment. You can't keep calling me every time you don't like what I'm doing with my life. We're not married anymore. We're barely even friends at this point. But She looked at Lila, then back at me, and something in her face changed. Are you dating my neighbor? I'm not your neighbor, Lila said pleasantly. I'm his neighbor. You live 30 minutes away, remember? You had to drive here specifically to stalk him. Harper's face went red. I wasn't stalking. I just wanted to see if he was happy without you. Lila finished. Because he is. Really, genuinely happy. Happier than I've ever seen him based on the stories he's told me about your marriage. I probably should have stopped Lila, but honestly, she was saying everything I'd been thinking for weeks. Harper looked like she'd been slapped. As your friend, I said, putting emphasis on the word. I'm happy to report that yes, I'm dating Lila. We're together. And before you say anything about how fast this happened or how inappropriate it is, remember that you're the one who ended our marriage. You don't get to police who I date or when I date them. Harper stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, she just said, I can't believe this is happening. Believe it, I said, not unkindly. Now please go home, Harper. Move on with your life like you wanted to. Find yourself. Be independent. But do it somewhere that isn't outside my apartment at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. She got back in her car without another word, and we watched her drive away. Lila turned to me and said, That was intense. You okay? Yeah, I said, and I realized I actually was. I think that was closure. The messy, uncomfortable kind, but closure nonetheless. Good, Lila said, taking my hand. Now can we go back inside? I made brownies earlier, and they're getting cold. You made brownies too? Procrastination baking strikes again. I really need to work on my deadline management skills. As we walked back inside, hand in hand, I looked back once at the spot where Harper's car had been. Part of me felt bad for her. She was clearly struggling, but the bigger part of me felt relieved. Relieved that I'd set boundaries. Relieved that I'd moved on. Relieved that I'd found someone who actually appreciated me instead of just using me. That night, Lila and I toasted to poetic justice with cheap wine and those brownies she'd made. And I realized something. Revenge isn't about making someone else miserable. It's about being so happy with your own life that their opinion of you doesn't matter anymore. A year later, it was my birthday again. Same date, completely different life. I woke up in Lila's apartment. Our apartment now, technically, since I'd moved in 3 months ago, and there was already a cake on the counter. A real cake, homemade, with frosting that said, "Thanks for not being a jerk," in wobbly letters that made me laugh so hard I nearly cried. "You like it?" Lila asked, appearing from the bedroom in pajamas and bedhead. "I love it," I said, pulling her into a hug. "It's perfect." She also got me a toolbox with a card that read, "For fixing everything except people." I laughed until my ribs hurt because it was funny and true and exactly the kind of gift that showed she actually knew me. Meanwhile, word through Marcus was that Harper had moved back in with her mom after getting evicted. Apparently, friendship didn't cover Wi-Fi bills either. Her latest Instagram caption read, "Sometimes life forces you to start over," which I translated as, "I miss Logan's rent money." I didn't feel bad. I felt free. Now, I run my own small repair business from home, and Lila and I live in a cozy house with a porch and a dog named Muffin, who's basically a potato with legs. She makes tea every morning, I fix whatever breaks, and we split everything 50-50 like actual partners do. Every now and then, I get a random text from Harper. "Hope you're well, friend." I always reply with my favorite line, "Absolutely." Because here's the thing about revenge. The best kind isn't dramatic or vindictive. It's not about making someone else miserable or proving a point. The best revenge is building a life so good, so peaceful, so genuinely happy that your ex's opinion becomes completely irrelevant. Harper wanted to find herself. I found myself too. Turned out I was a guy who deserved appreciation, partnership, and someone who actually knew how to restart a router. She got independence. I got peace, laughter, and a neighbor who actually bakes. And that, my friends, is how I turned the worst birthday of my life into the best decision I ever made.